Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated is Harry Potter. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name in the description below. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 91, A Nation Forged from War. How dare you say this to me, Croaker? Amelia thundered, her eyes blazing with fury as she stared down at the head of the Department of Mysteries, calmly sitting across from her on the other side of her desk. I know this is not what you wanted to hear, Minister, but you've got to come to terms with the truth. Harry Potter is lost to us. Croaker said in a monotone voice, largely unbothered by the outburst of the newly elected Minister of Magic. Amelia continued to glare into the emotionless eyes of Croaker before she fell into her seat with all the strength leaving her limbs. Why? You promised everyone that you could return Harry Potter so long as you had access to time turners. What has changed, Croaker? I need answers. Amelia asked. We've located Mr. Potter, but retrieving him is now nearly impossible, Croaker admitted with a sigh. On second thought, highly improbable might be the right words. Explain. Amelia demanded before taking a deep breath to calm down and think. Wait a moment, Croaker. Amelia immediately moved towards the fireplace and threw a handful of flue powder before dipping her face into the fire. Hogwarts headmaster's office. Amelia. What a pleasant surprise. Spare me the platitudes, Dumbledore. I have news to share about Harry Potter. You better come in haste. Amelia bit through her pursed lips before withdrawing her head from the fireplace of her new office. The old office of the Minister of Magic was now sealed off under the most powerful barriers and wards the Department of Mysteries could employ. To the public, it was under the pretense of an ongoing investigation regarding Fudge's corruption and possible Death Eater connection. To sell it better to the public, she had to place Fudge in a detention cell in the ministry. She had expected stiff resistance from Fudge's old colleagues and supporters but was greeted with dead silence. How long that'd continue was a relevant question, but she was willing to put that aside for the time being. The flue lit up with flames, and Albus Dumbledore stepped out of the fireplace in his flamboyant robes. Amelia. What news? Croaker says he can't retrieve Harry Potter. Amelia bluntly said forthrightly, leaving the headmaster gaping like a fish. What? Dumbledore was aghast. Why? Amelia stared at Croaker, who remained patiently in his seat without a change in his posture. Explain, Croaker. Very well. Croaker sighed before standing from his seat. Taking out his wand, he drew a straight line in thin air. Amelia raised an eyebrow when a thin silver line manifested on her eye level. Croaker then tapped 2 points on the silver line. 2 dots formed on the line, one was red, and the other was black. Consider for a moment the black dot is us in the present, and the red dot is Mr. Potter in the past. We must traverse the distance between these two spots to get to Mr. Potter. The good news is we know for certain Mr. Potter is lost in the past, but we cannot retrieve him because the past branched off into a new reality. Said Croaker, drawing a red line from the red dot branching away from the white line. I don't follow, said Amelia, scowling at the wizard. I'm also confused, but first, how are you sure Harry is not lost in the future instead of the past? Asked Dumbledore. Because the future is not set in stone. The future contains events that have not happened, and therefore, magic has limited powers over the future. Time turners are specifically designed not to access the future because the entire magic in the world is not enough to construct events that are yet to be. If Mr. Potter is in the past, on the other hand, it has already happened and is therefore accessible, transporting matter through time and space. Okay. Then what is the issue in retrieving Harry from the past? Dumbledore calmly asked. Because Mr. Potter is no longer strictly in the past. Croaker said. You are not making sense, Croaker. If Mr. Potter is not in the past or the future, where is he? Amelia asked, annoyed by the long-winded conversation. Speak plainly instead of wasting our time. Very well then. I'll make it simple. Mr. Potter is in an alternate reality of our past. Amelia looked expectantly at the man, but Croaker looked at her as if that explained everything. Croaker. Amelia bit out. Yes. I distinctly remember asking you to explain what happened to Mr. Potter plainly, Amelia said with restraint she thought she lacked. I don't think I can make this any plainer, Minister Bones. Mr. Potter is in the past, but a significant event changed in the past, which has triggered the creation of an alternate reality to branch out from our past. Are you saying a whole new world was born from Harry's accidental arrival into the past? Dumbledore asked curiously. Yes. Some event in the past shifted so drastically that it has created the reality we have experienced. I do not understand this. How can a new reality be born if something changes in the past? Whatever changes in the past do not affect the future because we are here, right? Amelia asked confusedly. That's because you are viewing time as a linear stream. You think the clock spins and time passes with every second. But that's the low-resolution understanding of time we created to make sense of our everyday lives. That's not how time works, Croaker said with a sigh. He drew a large circle in the air with his wand. Time is cyclical, and we observe time from one point. But what if I take an arbitrary point in space and create another loop of time? Croaker tapped his wand at a point on the circle and drew another circle, but it was tilted on its axis. Again and again, he drew several other circles with tilted axes but with a common center. These are all time loops but observable only in a specific dimension of space. Similarly, Mr. Potter is in the past, but he occupies a space different from our dimension. I don't know what changed, but it must have been something fundamental enough that shattered reality as we know it. The silence that prevailed was the most uncomfortable for Amelia as all her plans hinged on rescuing Harry Potter from the freak accident that whisked away the boy. We must get the boy back somehow. The prophet has already started to call him the chosen one as some idiot in the ministry spilt the beans about rumors of a prophecy involving Potter and the Dark Lord. If the public learns Harry Potter, the boy who crippled the worst Dark Lord we have ever seen, is lost due to a fluke accident, they'll lose all hope to fight. It'll be an easy victory for the Dark Lord and his Death Eaters, Amelia said, falling into her seat and placing her head in her palms. Amelia is right. Harry is a beacon of hope for many, and we can't afford to lose him at this juncture. Is there any way we can retrieve Harry? Dumbledore asked, looking hopefully at Croaker. There is a small chance, Croaker breathed, shaking his head. But it's highly experimental, and I'll need the aid of your Phoenix, Dumbledore. Fawkes? Dumbledore blinked in surprise. Of course, but may I know why? Because a Phoenix is a creature untouched by time in the conventional sense. Only 2 days have passed for us, but that may not necessarily be the case for Mr. Potter. A day for us might be a month, a year, or a second for Mr. Potter. We frankly don't know. Croaker shrugged while rubbing the back of his neck in a sheepish manner. I see. Fawkes perceives time differently. Dumbledore nodded in understanding. Yes. It'll be better if we have the aid of a Phoenix. I'll need your Phoenix to carry something to Mr. Potter and create a bridge connecting us through time and space if we are to retrieve them successfully. Croaker explained. I believe Fawkes would be more than happy to help. It also helps Fawkes have a rapport with Harry, said Dumbledore. Then it's settled, said Amelia. Seeing the two men nod, she let out a sigh of relief. How long will you need to make the attempt? She asked immediately. Soon. As I said, Minister, this will be an experimental procedure. We've never done something like this in the history of the Department of Mysteries. Give me some time, said Croaker. Unfortunately for us, time is something we do not have in abundance, Amelia said, rubbing her face tiredly. Do what you must, but do it fast. I hate to say this, but the fate of the wizarding world rests on that boy's hands. As months passed, Harry developed a tight schedule between his duties at Hogwarts and Hogsmeade's demanding work. At first, his work in the village was focused on building houses for the 30 families that were refugees in Hogwarts during the war. This later developed into Harry being saddled with the responsibility for the village's security and being the sole arbitrator of disputes despite his strenuous objection. He had tried to pawn off the undesirable job on Salazar Slytherin or the other founders, but they expertly evaded all responsibility. It was not that he disliked the position of power in Hogsmeade, but the responsibility of being a village leader of wizards and witches robbed most of his free time. This left Harry little time for his attempts at studying the time turner in his possession. But that was 2 months back, and Harry had abandoned his study of the faulty time turner after constantly hitting dead ends. Instead of wasting his time on an impossible task, Harry was more or less resigned to accepting the harsh truth that he was not getting out of the current timeline. With his attempts to study the time turner to rest, he dedicated much of his time to Hogwarts and helping wizards and witches to thrive in the world. Instead of viewing his situation as a curse, Harry started seeing an opportunity. The Muggles were bereft of rampant scientific and technological advancements. This left them relatively weak in Harry's eyes. However, in that weakness, he saw an opportunity for the wizarding world. As of late, he started to entertain the idea of creating a magical nation in the British Isles. While he had made up the fanciful tale of Valyria, he was equally enthralled by the prospect of forging a nation exclusively for magical beings. A nation exclusively for those blessed with magic. Harry mused, staring at a crude map of the British Isles. The idea had its merits, but Harry knew accomplishing such a task was bloody. What would happen to the millions of Muggles inhabiting the home islands if a nation for magical beings was forged in the British Isles? That was a moral, political, and geopolitical quandary. With a deep sigh, Harry set aside the map and tended to the fire that was giving him the warmth to ward off the cold of the night. Instead of using the bed in the castle, Harry decided to camp near the Black Lake. He also waived the use of warming charms to keep himself warm during the night. The bright full moon shining in the night sky tempted him not to think of dreary topics of conquests and wars. But the markers he made on the map of Britain stole his attention from the beautiful moon in the night sky. Harry had marked the different kingdoms that were in existence in England and Scotland. The Anglo-Saxon petty kingdoms in English lands were getting consolidated under the rule of a single king of England. On the other hand, Scotland was also suffering from small kingdoms inside the larger Scotland area Harry knew from his time. Hogwarts was sitting inside the territory claimed by King Constantine of the Kingdom of Alba, while the rest of Scotland proper was divided between Strathclyde and Northumbria. Those Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were kept in check by constant Viking invasions. The situation in the Islands was far worse from all the sources he could get from Hogwarts. Supposedly, there were Viking enclaves in Ireland, leaving the Irish kings in a constant state of war. These settlements were also a cause of concern for the rest of the Isles because the Vikings could launch their ships from Ireland to anywhere in the home islands. However, the levers of power were truly in the hands of Rome even though the Roman Empire had withdrawn from the British Isles on paper. The clergymen were in key positions of the many royal courts, and they enforced church doctrine on the Isles using the Muggle kings. Whenever the church's authority was challenged, the king would either get deposed or invaded by a rival kingdom. Therefore, the church and its teachings had to be destroyed if he were to forge a magical enclave inside the British Isles. Unfortunately, that was nearly an impossible and bloody task. If he wanted to use the Muggles in an army against their own kind, he'd definitely want to make this a religious war, and he'd need non-Christian allies. I'll have to turn the Vikings into allies at some point to sow more discord among the Muggle kingdoms. Harry thought with a grimace. Harry shook his head, realizing the conquest he fantasized about was too much of a hassle. He began scribbling down the idea in a diary he kept exclusively for jotting down ideas for the expansion of Hogsmeade. It also had to be factored in that some of the information he gathered from Hogwarts about the present-day polities of Britain might not be accurate. It was not as if he could verify and cross-reference the current status of the Isles using newspaper clippings or some media reports. The curse of the ancient world was that information was sketchy and highly unreliable. He suddenly sat up alert when the proximity ward he had set up was breached. However, he relaxed upon seeing Rowena walking towards him from afar. What was that ward? Was it some kind of an early warning spell? Rowena asked once she neared his tent. A proximity ward. It allows me to find intruders in an area under the ward. Harry explained. That sounds useful. Rowena nodded before looking around his modest campsite with a curious look. Did the facilities in Hogwarts displease you? Oh, heavens no. I just wanted to enjoy the moon. Harry nodded towards the full moon shining brightly in the night sky. The night sky was beautiful, littered with spots of brightly shining stars and constellations. Harry could even pick out a few planets in the sky. The lack of industrial revolution and wide-spanning metropolitan cities cropping up every few miles meant that there was less pollution and artificial light in the sky. This made it easy to enjoy sights like these. Then again, he desperately missed modern food and other Muggle inventions like the radio. He desperately wanted to enjoy some music while camping outside but was out of luck. I should have carried an emergency supply bag on my person, Harry thought. Harry quickly jotted down a reminder in his diary about the emergency supply bag as a backup with all the essential things he needed to survive if he were to be cut off from all known civilization. What's that? Rowena asked. Oh, this? Just some notes on, hey. Harry was affronted when Rowena snatched away his diary. Rowena hummed to herself over the notes he made. Your language. Valyrian is simpler, Rowena said in perfect English instead of the guttural Gaelic. He was not surprised to see Rowena had quickly learned modern English, which he had passed off as Valyrian, the official language of his fake homeland. To facilitate the fast learning curve of his students, Harry had to write a whole book on the English language and keep it in the library of Hogwarts. It was a necessity because correct pronunciation of spells was necessary for beginners. It's made from the combination of Latin and Germanic languages. I know, I read your book, Rowena commented, never taking her eyes away from the contents of the diary. A light gale went past them, and Harry was mesmerized by the beauty of the witch standing before him as her hair danced in the wind. Her blue and red dress hugged the curves of her body in all the right places. Her hair was the color of the reddest of wines he had ever seen, which he only found more attractive in the moonlight. You know it's rude to read someone's diary. Harry scowled at the woman, beating down the kind of feelings that were overtaking his mind. I'm just curious what you're planning, said Rowena while leafing through the pages of his diary. Haven't you ever heard of the saying, curiosity killed the cat? Harry asked, gazing at the Hogwarts founder in a different light. Of course, Harry was not blind to see the sheer beauty of the witch he admired in his own timeline. Anyone possessing the sophisticated mind that birthed the enchanted ceiling of Hogwarts was worth his attention. Since then, many great wizards and witches have copied the work of Ravenclaw, but they all paled in comparison. It was one of the most elegant magic Harry had ever seen in his admittedly short stint as a wizard. There was also the masterpiece in the form of the Room of Requirement, a piece of magic that no one in the wizarding world could ever replicate. Never heard of it, Rowena muttered distractedly while running her eyes through the pages at a pace that made Harry raise an eyebrow. Shrugging his shoulders, he settled on the ground and waited patiently for the witch to finish reading his diary. There was no great secret hidden in his diary anyway. So, you've decided to stay in these lands, Rowena commented, holding out the diary after she finished reading. What gave you that impression? He asked, taking back the diary into his possession. What other reason is there in planning a conquest of Scotland? Rowena asked, tilting her head to the side. Maybe I'm bored. Harry shrugged his shoulders. Bored enough to be callous of the bloodshed from the war you're planning? Rowena asked, with a hint of disapproval shining in her eyes. Nations are forged by waging war. If you're comfortable watching the Muggles take over all the lands, then by all means do so, said Harry. I find you interesting, Hadrian. You advocated strongly for the lives of 4 dragons that attacked us, but now you plan on waging a war on the Muggles that never harmed you. I'll fear dragons when they start breeding like rabbits, Harry said blandly. He was a little disappointed that a brilliant woman like Rowena Ravenclaw could not see the obvious threat Muggles posed to wizardkind. Of course, the founders don't have the benefit of foreknowledge regarding the growth curve of the Muggles. Man has been waging war amongst each other since he walked the earth. He is not going to stop till the end of times. If our people and other magical creatures are to survive better, we need a place of our own. A sentiment that I share, Hadrian. But our people are not strong enough. Most wizards and witches are not skilled to protect themselves, much less attack huge swaths of Muggle armies. Well, I can be persuaded not to seek war with the Muggles if I'm otherwise engaged, said Harry, reaching out with his hand towards Rowena. The silence that followed stumped him. Harry thought he had overstepped a boundary for a moment, but he was startled when Rowena placed her hand in his. A grin broke out on his face, and he pulled her into his lap. They gazed into each other's eyes before their lips met with the moon and the stars as their witness. Chapter 92, Freedom, Magic and Scotland. A mage's power comes from their relationship with the magic in the land. The stave helps to keep the nodes on our wrists connected with magic, but it'll be on the wizard to shape the magic to cast spells. Rowena said. Harry maintained his posture while sitting cross-legged on the ground, trying his best to pull magic out of the land with the aid of a stave. In theory, it was a simple process. All he had to do was to pull magic out of the ground, coalesce the energy inside the stave, mix the energy with his bodily magic and then shape the magic into a spell. However, it was a challenge to pull magic out of the ground. Try as he might, Harry found he had mixed results in pulling magic out of the land. He could achieve this task using Parseltongue, but that was not good enough. While Parseltongue was a useful skill, it was not combat-friendly. While no one could identify the spell if he were to speak in Parseltongue, it still announced to his enemies that he was attempting one. The advantages of silent casting would be nullified if he were to rely on Parseltongue. Not to mention, it was not a bright idea to air out his status as a Parselmouth. The last thing he wanted was to air out his secrets to random strangers or even possible enemies. This was not exactly a safe time for wizards. Witch burnings were rampant among the Muggles. The problem he was facing was not from magic. At least, he hoped it was not. Harry was sure his ability to absorb magic into the stave from the land had more to do with the stave. He came to this conclusion simply by observing the lofty quality of wands used by the wizards. Therefore, he saw no reason to assume the stave he found was any better. The quality of magical foci available at the current time was lacking mostly because of a lack of professional wand crafters or staff crafters. This also led to a shortage of core materials. Unicorn tail hair was the most common core material used in wands or staff. Unfortunately, Harry's bodily magic was diametrically opposed to the unicorn hair core in his stave. My suggestion would be to practice with your wand for now. Perhaps you'll bond with a better stave in the future. Rowena suggested after seeing his repeated failures. Harry scrunched up his nose in dissatisfaction. The entire reason he had gone out of his way to procure a stave was to master old magic in the traditional sense. If that was not possible, he had no choice but to depend on Parseltongue. Harry abandoned the stave he procured from a local stave crafter for the next few weeks in favor of his trusted holly wand. At the same time, Harry also started venturing into wand crafting. He was mostly focused on collecting small parts from the dragon he had charmingly named the Red Queen. By the preening the dragon had been doing at the name, Harry was sure the dragon just got an ego boost. He remembered dragon heartstrings being one of the core materials Ollivander used in his wands. But Harry couldn't get his hands on one of those because there were no dead dragons to harvest. Therefore, he went on occasional hunts for other magical creatures in the forests surrounding Hogwarts. Mostly, his prey were a stray thestral herd, kelpie, measles, etc. One night, he returned from his hunt, securing a few strands of thestral hairs from a herd not far from the castle. The thestrals, being a peaceful bunch, were hardly bothered by his scavenging for their tail hair. But upon his return to the castle, he was immediately accosted by a grieving family from Hogsmeade. "They took my husband, my lord," the witch wailed, crying her eyes out. The witch refused to elaborate despite Harry's strenuous efforts and repeated the claim like a mantra in an endless loop. So, he abandoned the hope of getting any straight answer from the hysterical woman and instead inquired with other wizards and witches accompanying her. "What happened to her husband?" Harry asked. "The Muggles, my lord. They took Cato, accusing him of being a wizard when selling pumpkins in the Muggle village. They say the church is keeping him prisoner and intends to burn him tomorrow, one of the villagers said. It's starting again, my lord. They'll come after us all and burn us all at the stake, another villager fearfully said, spreading a wave of fear among the villagers. No one is coming to burn us, and Cato will not be burned at the stake either, Harry said firmly. Does anyone know where this Muggle village is located? I know, my lord. That'll do. Harry nodded at the man before shooing away the rest of the villagers, including the grieving wife of the hostage. What's your name? Peleus, my lord, the man grinned, showing off his crooked teeth. I need you to tell me everything you know about this village. Harry observed the village in question from a distance under the cover of a disillusion charm. The village looked like a rundown hellhole crawling with rats. The worst thing was that he could feel the odorous shit of the village folk from miles away. Scrunching up his nose in disgust, he congratulated himself for having the presence of mind to build a sound sewage system for Hogsmeade. He had Rowena's help setting that up, as she had experience doing the same for Hogwarts. He supposed he shouldn't disparage the Muggles too much on their planning skills, as wizards had an advantage with magic. The average Muggle during this era was ignorant of the importance of cleanliness. People shat and pissed on the open fields without a care in the world because they didn't know any better and they were poor. Most people didn't have a roof over their heads. So, having a functioning toilet and waste disposal systems was a luxury they couldn't afford. Harry dispelled the invisibility charm around himself and Peleus. Where is Cato held? That chapel, my lord. The church people keep our kind in the dungeons of their church like rats. Peleus said with wrath as he stared at the chapel. Let's break them out then, said Harry before walking straight towards the village. Wait. My lord, what are you doing? Peleus asked in a hurry as he followed Harry. What wizards should have done from the beginning, wage war. Harry said frostily before walking towards the village with long strides. The village had little to no fortification anywhere. But it had a few armed soldiers patrolling the streets near the road leading to the village. You one who are. The soldier didn't get to finish before Harry promptly cast the disarming charm, silenced him and had him neutralized using the body binding charm. Seeing the bright flashes of spellfire, the remaining two guards charged at Harry with their swords drawn. Levi Corpus. The two soldiers let out frightened screams as they were suddenly dangling upside down in midair by their ankles. He let them dangle in the air but secured them using ropes that shot out of his wand on a mere thought. Though he had left two Muggle guards to dangle in midair, he had left them conscious and free to scream their hearts out. Just like he wished, the villagers woke from the guards' frightened screaming, which made it easy for what Harry was about to do next. Witch. Satan spawn. Demon. The villagers began shouting once they saw the soldiers dangling in midair. To Harry's mild surprise, instead of getting frightened, the Muggles started throwing stones and anything solid they could get their hands on against him. But he was well prepared. Harry covered himself and Peleus using a shield charm that made the stones and other objects bounce away. You'll never again pick up a weapon against a wizard. Harry vowed before using a wide area blasting curse that blew the villagers off their feet. The church bell began ringing in earnest, possibly to alert the entire village of the impending danger. Harry fired off a spell, pointing his wand at the church's doors. Bombarda Maxima. The church doors were blown wide open as a sizzling orange spell impacted the doors. The Muggles standing behind the doors were blown to bits under the spell's power. Incendio. Harry spun his wand in a wide arc that made it put out flames that lit up the whole street. The sudden emergence of flames made the disoriented Muggles scream in terror and give him a wide berth. Using the situation to his advantage, Harry walked towards the church with long, purposeful strides while he cleared off the debris blocking his way by vanishing them into thin air. Once he stepped into the church, he faced a priest holding a cross while muttering prayers. The priest was a middle-aged bald fellow dressed in dark robes. The man shook like a leaf while speaking softly into his closed hands as if some divine entity heard the man's mad ramblings. Harry's attention went to the aides of the priest instead. You. Lead me to the cellars beneath this church where you hold prisoners," Harry ordered, jabbing his wand threateningly at the pair of aides standing near the priest. "I command thee, Sata." "Ah ha ah!" The aide screamed as Harry used a bone breaker on the man's hand. The sound of the bone snapping could be heard loud and clear inside the church, making the priest and the other aide flinch. Extorquio! A sickly-looking yellow spell crashed into the aide's shoulder. The aide screamed again as his right arm hung loosely from his shoulder when Harry used the joint-dislocating spell. "I don't have all day. One of you will lead me to the cellar, or heads will roll." Harry threatened the remaining duo while their colleagues screamed to the heavens, cradling his broken arm. The other aide to the priest volunteered, and Harry was promptly led towards the cellar while he left the priest in the custody of Peleus. The cellars were filled with prisoners, most of them women and children. "Tell me of their crimes," Harry ordered, staring coldly at the muggle, making him gulp nervously. "Witchcraft," the muggle whispered with fear shining in his eyes. "Release them all," Harry ordered without showing any emotion. One by one, the prisoners were released from their cells. "Who's Cato?" Harry asked loudly at the group of prisoners. "My lord! My lord! You came for me." A brown-haired man came before Harry and prostrated himself at his feet. "I promised you protection when we built the village. So, of course, I came for you." "Now, up on your feet, man," said Harry. "May the spirits bless you, Lord Targaryen." Cato bowed his head before walking out of the cellar with the other prisoners, who also muttered their thanks to Harry for freeing them. Harry had the church aide at one point and had the man escorted out after the prisoners. He had the newly freed prisoners, and the church officials assembled outside the church. From this day forth, Christianity will never be practiced in this village. I, Hadrian Targaryen, declare this religion foreign and alien to Scotland. This is the land of magic, and it'll remain so till the sun loses its light. Harry proclaimed with the aid of the sonorous charm, amplifying his voice so that the entire village could hear him. "This will not stop the Lord's work. You've merely ensured your doom, Satan's spawn. Your magic comes from the devil, and in God's good time, your kind will be wiped out by his favored knights," the priest loudly proclaimed once Harry made his. With remarkable sagacity, Harry thwarted the priest's attempt at controlling the crowd through religious fanatism and fear. In such situations, Harry knew only one thing could swing public opinion: power. Flagellate flagellum. A long 10-foot whip of bright orange flames formed from the tip of his wand. The ground sizzled as the fiery whip coiled on the ground. Harry made the priest press face first against the church wall with a flick of his left palm. Wandless magic was a difficult trick to pull off in the past, but Harry had noticed he was getting better with it every day under Rowena's tutelage of old magic. "You claim your god will strike me down. Let's see if this god of yours has the power to defend you, his faithful servant, from my strike," Harry said coldly before he swung his wand arm. The fiery whip seared a long gash on the back of the priest, making the balding priest scream at the top of his lungs. He swung again, and there was now an X-shaped burnt scar on the priest's skin while the priest screamed himself hoarse. The priest's clothes were aflame, and Harry doused them using conjured water. The priest continued to cry as the burnt skin on his back remained an angry red despite the water cooling off the searing heat. "Now you see, my brothers and sisters of Scotland. Where is this all-powerful God? Where is the might of the heavens? Where is the miracle?" Harry asked, looking at the villagers while pointing at the helpless crying priest. Harry turned his attention back to the priest. "You may leave this village. Spread the word to the rest of your friends that your shared delusion will no longer be tolerated in Scotland. I'm coming for you all." A few minutes after his decree, Harry, as well as the villagers, watched the priest and the aide with the dislocated shoulder was exiled from the village. Harry gave them a horse to ride away, knowing they'd inform some petty lords or knights of what happened in the village. That was precisely what he wanted anyway. Harry also had the prisoners strip everything remotely useful from the church. While they were looting the church, Harry focused on applying the memory charm on the captured villagers. His intent was quite simple. He removed all memories of the church and preaching the villagers ever heard from their minds. He also had all religion-related icons and records summoned using magic and had them destroyed. While destroying the icons and written records was easy, wiping out the memories of religious indoctrination was not an easy feat. It was time-consuming and challenging to pull off. Harry was not surprised that he had barely wiped the memories of half the people in the village before a scout alerted him about a company of knights riding towards the village. "We should withdraw to Hogsmeade, Lord Targaryen. They'll not hesitate to send an army of thousands against our kind," Peleus warned quietly. "Good. That's exactly what I want," said Harry. Harry expected the confused stare from Peleus, and therefore, he was not surprised to see the wizard looking lost. "I don't understand, my lord." "The Muggles, they are a valuable resource for those who can see their worth. Maybe they lack magic, but they can provide us with a sizable army." Harry cut in. "An army for us? But who'll they fight?" Peleus asked. "Who else?" "Their own brethren and, if need be, the goblins," said Harry with a disinterested shrug. But, that's impossible." Peleus stuttered while looking at Harry in disbelief. "Is it?" Harry asked rhetorically. Looking ahead, Harry waited patiently for these knights to arrive. He had given some thought and length about the Muggles on both timelines. While many Dark Lords saw the Muggles as an enemy that had to be wiped out, he saw the value in Muggles because he was one in the past. The Muggles were capable of radical advancements at a pace that frankly outstripped the growth of the wizarding world by leaps and bounds. Harry only saw advantages in combining the scientific exploration embedded in the Muggle consciousness and the magical power of wizards. The hurdles before such a union were the inherent deep, entrenched misconceptions among Muggles and Magicals alike. The enmity cultivated for over 1,000 years was hard-pressed to be wiped away from both people overnight. He doubted even centuries of peaceful coexistence would heal such deep wounds of the past. At least, it was nearly impossible for Muggles and magic to coexist in the future timeline despite the rainbow utopian bullshit Dumbledore was selling. But that was not the case in the current times, where Harry found himself in by a trick of fate. He understood the unique advantage he was presented with. If he could pull the wizards and witches of the current time to a level of competence in magic, many great things could be achieved. Instead of brutishly taking the fight to the Muggles all the time, a more subtle approach could yield better results. Therefore, Harry was intent on testing out his theory, and if it yielded better results, he could replicate it on a larger scale. "My lord, look!" Peleus urgently whispered. Harry found the company of knights emerge from the tree-line, riding as fast as possible on their horses. "Swords and arrows are not something to be feared when you have magic, Peleus. The problem with our people is that most of our kind don't know anything about magic or don't bother to learn. If they had..." Harry flicked his wand, and a bright wave of bluish energy washed over the knights and their horses. Levi Corpus. They'd have never feared Muggles. Harry finished, staring unimpressed as the knights and their horses were hung upside down by their ankles in midair. Mobila Corpus. With another flick of his wand, he had the floating knights move with his wand movement. Harry counted 12 knights among the group and had them disarmed before having them bound in ropes. He promptly used a combination of memory charms and legilimency to convert the knights into his loyal soldiers with no memory of their religious convictions. Without the element of religion in their heads, the knights were quite cooperative. He continued his work on the villagers one by one until finally, he finished his work on most of the people by sunset. The remaining were stuffed and kept isolated under spells as his prisoners until he could rewire their minds. When the night fell, Harry had the villagers gathered before a bonfire as he addressed them. His casual displays of magic had long since become familiar to the villagers, and therefore, they didn't bat an eye when he conjured an enormous amount of fire behind him with a flick of his wand. "Our enemy is cunning and subtle. It hides within constructs like these, indoctrinating good Scottish men and women of their lies so that they can sap our strength. They want to keep us weak and force us to forget the delightful blessings of magic. They want us to turn our eyes away from nature's beauty, diversity, and divinity. They want to destroy our oneness with nature to worship a fictional story with fictional megalomaniac characters. They want us and our children to become slaves to a fictional construct of theirs so that we lose our strength and sight of magic from our blood and souls. Do you want to become slaves to such an uncaring, cruel, and imaginary being? No, the villagers shouted with the 12 knights, the most prominent with zealotry in their eyes. My friends, I do not wish to wage war on our brethren. I wish to save them from the danger of these Romans and their lies. Join me, sons and daughters of Scotland, to free our land from the Church of Rome and its perfidious hold on our people's minds. For freedom. For magic. For Scotland. The chanting of the villagers grew more potent, and Harry let the spell loose on the church behind him. The flames consumed the building whole and left nothing in its wake. The fire burned brightly, lighting up the whole village with its light chasing away the darkness of the night. One village down. Several more to go. Harry thought. Chapter 93, In a Raven's Arm. What started as a rescue mission spiraled into a war of conquest in a matter of days. Initially, Harry had only intended to carve out a small fiefdom for the magical community to thrive by taking possession of several neighboring Muggle villages within a 50-mile radius of Hogwarts. To that effect, he used the same strategy in the first village. He selected a village, attacked them early in the morning, and destroyed everything related to any religion in one day. Then, he wiped the villagers' memories the following week while securing the village under wards to keep them safe from Muggle attacks. After entrenching himself in these villages, he also started recruiting Muggle militias by turning the knights sworn to King Constantine of the Kingdom of Alba into his loyal followers. The constraints presented by the rapid expansion of his fiefdom also presented a problem. He alone remained the skilled wizard capable of wiping memories from the Muggle populace. It was a taxing process to wipe memories of the Muggles one by one, supplanting the indoctrination done by the Church of Rome. But the sheer number of Muggles made it impossible for Harry to reach everyone. This led him to confine his brainwashing enterprise to knights and recruit militia soldiers. For now, the time constraints on his person and the lack of skilled wizards and witches affected any expansion he could possibly make. However, it was by no means a simple feat to capture 14 Muggle villages in the span of 3 weeks with no army to speak of or even supplies. His budding army of knights and common soldiers could not fight on an empty stomach. Establishing a stable source of food, water, medicine, weapons, and other resources was necessary to pursue a successful war against the Muggles. That was why Harry understood the need to enlist the aid of the world's most powerful herbologist for his war effort. My lord. Are you sure you should leave now? We don't have enough men to guard our gains should Constantine's armies turn their sights on the villages we captured. Peleus urgently whispered. I know. That's why I've erected wards to deter the Muggles. Their armies won't find our villages. Harry assured the man. When the Romans came to these lands, our people thought our magical skills could withstand their assault. Look at us now, said Peleus, sweeping his arms wide. We've forgotten who we were and are busy doing what the Romans are doing. What are you saying? Harry asked with a frown. It's good that you're leading us, and it's good that your magic is so overwhelmingly powerful enough to sweep through village after village on a dime. But the people need a king of Scotland to rally behind, said Peleus. Harry fell silent and merely stared at the boundaries of the village he was occupying. The thought of staking his claim for kingship had crossed his mind, and he was prepared to wage a war to that effect. After all, his aim of creating a magical fiefdom in Scotland would only become a reality if the wizards and witches of Scotland created the ruling bureaucracy. What that current government formed remained a mystery, but he'd definitely not want democracy to crop up. At least, he didn't see any virtue in establishing a democracy in a land where the majority were illiterate buffoons. He was a staunch believer in the critics of Plato on democracy. Without a literate, wise, and well-educated populace, democracy would only facilitate selfish and ignorant people to attain power. In his lifetime, he had seen the rise of populist regimes and the nation plunging into chaos in their wake. However, he was also mindful that the wizened elitist rule proposed by Socrates was also an abject failure. Primarily because men and women could not ensure their wisdom could be sustainable in their chosen successors. Even great men like Marcus Aurelius had failed to produce worthy and wise successors. So, Harry saw no reason to trust an elite council of wizards and witches to rule Scotland. There were no good answers to the question of who should rule Scotland. It had been the age-old question humanity had been asking since man learned to hunt and farm. It was a question that'd never be settled without some form of bloodshed. Despite all that, Harry saw the merit in crowning a magical king for Scotland. Establishing a kingdom that'd safeguard the rights of wizards and muggles could perhaps be a beacon of hope for wizarding communities across the planet. Perhaps we can coexist if I can purge religion from muggles, Harry thought. The moment the thought came to him, Harry shook his head at his naivete. He knew religion was not the core issue. It was in the nature of muggles and wizards to distrust and destroy each other. Religion or no religion, the conflict could never be permanently settled. Those with power will try to safeguard it at all costs, and those without will kill for it, Harry muttered. My lord? Peleus looked at him in askance. It's nothing, said Harry. I'll give your suggestion some serious thought, Peleus. I hope you do. Even if your magic can protect us, Constantine's court might advise him to employ other wizards against us like the Romans did when they first came to our lands. They'll start to use their maps, and they'll trace the villages, Peleus warned. Let me assuage your fears about the village's security. Harry turned his wand on the whole village. Nebulous. Thick fog began to gather outside the village. He willed his magic to let the fog surround the village from all corners, neatly hiding the place from curious eyes. Even if the Muggles' king enlists the services of sorcerers, they'll be hard-pressed to find the villages I conquered. For now, that'll do, said Harry, nodding at the thick fog covering the village. After saying his goodbyes, he ascended to the sky in his spirit form. He was really starting to regret not learning to apparate or even the portus spell. His method of transportation was not as fast as the ones used by the wizards of his time. Harry's return to Hogwarts was with some fanfare. Hogsmeade had immediately turned his arrival into a sort of mini-festival. With his conquest in full swing, Hogsmeade was experiencing an increased trade, especially in magical potions. The Muggles were far more receptive to magical medicines and the wares of wizards. However, how long would that last? That was a question Harry was asking himself every day. He knew religion was not precisely the sole issue between Muggles and wizards. It was just that the intensity of persecution only increased when the Muggles abandoned the worship of forces of nature. There was no shortage of bigots among Muggles and wizards. I suppose I'm a bigot among wizards now, Harry amusedly thought as he waded through a sea of happy faces and well-wishers to Hogwarts. He was more careful when he entered Hogwarts by cloaking himself from the students. Getting swarmed by the residents of Hogsmeade was one thing, but having it repeated by Hogwarts students would be disruptive to the school's normal functioning. You've become popular among the people of Hogsmeade and the students. Harry paused as the words filtered in through his ears before he slowly turned around to find Salazar Slytherin leaning against a wall. He had completely missed the man standing there, and not even his sensory magic had detected the founder. But, of course, Harry was not that surprised. Slytherin was a master of blood magic and parcel magic, allowing him to blend in almost anywhere. It was something Harry was trying to learn under Rowena's tutelage by mastering old magic. They desperately wanted trade restored, and I've seen to it, Harry replied. Do you really think that's the only reason? Salazar asked with a snort. Harry didn't answer that and merely shrugged his shoulders. Follow me, Hadrian, Salazar suddenly said before turning around and walked away. Harry had to walk a bit faster to catch up with the founder. He soon found himself entering Salazar's office adjacent to the room where potions were brewed. The room was filled with potion ingredients and scrolls. It's the first time in living memory of our people that a wizard is trying to carve out a kingdom of his own. You needn't feel like you've to defend or explain yourselves. If I hadn't been bound by oaths, I would've, anyway. Salazar shook his head. Let me say that what you're doing is something that I approve of, and I wish you the very best in your campaign. Thank you, Salazar. Harry nodded, feeling happy for the compliment paid by the Hogwarts founder. It was not every day that one of the Hogwarts founders gave you their blessings and compliments. So, Harry soaked it up like a sponge, especially since it came from Salazar Slytherin. Anyway, I've been studying your form of magic and found it extremely easy to learn and teach compared to our own. You'll be heartened to know that we've started framing the lessons based on your branch of magic and language. That's heartening to hear, Harry said, feeling a sense of accomplishment. One of the major reasons wizards preferred to hide instead of fight the Muggles for dominion over the lands was that most wizards were unskilled in battle magic. At the same time, Muggles were quite adept at fighting and followed a militaristic culture out of necessity. While Harry didn't wish for the wizarding population to turn militaristic, he hoped they would develop a spine and defend themselves from their attackers rather than cower behind wards while the world changed around them. Well, I won't keep you from meeting Rowena. But I have something for you, Hadrian. Salazar fished out a scroll from his black robes and gave it to Harry. Rowena told me that you've been struggling with our form of magic but excelled at it while using Parseltongue. This should help you more in that endeavor, said Salazar. When Harry unruffled the scroll, he found it was a treasure trove of information on parcel magic, which also meant he was now in possession of a scroll on binding magic using blood. When he looked up from the scroll to thank the founder, Salazar was nowhere to be seen. So cool. I think I'm on Team Slytherin from now on, Harry thought before his eyes went back to admiring the elegant English script on the scroll. He even learned the language this fast. Salazar Slytherin is a genius. Harry found Rowena in a class full of students hanging on to every word she was saying about runes. He remained invisible as he didn't want to disturb the class. Unlike popular belief, Rowena Ravenclaw was not a highly skilled enchantress or a charms mistress in modern magical terms. She could enchant, but her primary skill lay in runes and astronomy. She had a huge repository of battle charms in her mind, but her forte lay in runes and astronomy. He supposed she later developed the fortitude for charms and became renowned for the enchanted ceiling of Hogwarts. The fact that Hogwarts still lacked an enchanted ceiling proved his assumption. The same could be said about the Sorting Hat. He had seen the hat on Godric Gryffindor, but it neither talked nor gave off a magical aura when he scanned it. Once again, Harry was reminded of how far he had traveled back in time. The founders were young, considering the lifespan of powerful wizards. It was just a theory on his part, but Harry believed the more magic a wizard amassed over the years, the greater their lifespan is extended. All sacrificial rituals he had studied from the Black Library and Slytherin's library used components that could enhance the inflow of magic into the body. All strengthening rituals also followed the same pattern. The real-life examples of Dumbledore, Grindelwald, Alastor Moody and even Voldemort, to some extent came to his mind. Most of the founders were in their early 40s or 30s. So, they had more than enough time in the world to become far more powerful and renowned for their magical skills. Harry waited for the class to end, patiently listening to Rowena's words. When the class finally ended, he waited for the students to filter out before he stepped into the classroom. Carefully, he made his way towards Rowena, who had her back turned while cleaning the runes drawn on the board. When he was just about to surprise her from behind. I know you're there. Your charms are flimsy at best for hiding yourself from a proper sorceress. Rowena's words cut deeply into him, making him freeze. Shrugging his shoulder, Harry dropped the spells concealing him, but he wrapped an arm around Rowena's waist, earning a squeak of protest from the witch. I have something for you, Harry whispered before offering the book he had painstakingly written, employing all his imaginative powers. The book's cover read The House of the Dragon with the Targaryen sigil of the three-headed dragon painted on the cover. It was a brief history of House Targaryen in Valyria. He had been worried whenever someone asked about his home island and his family. So, he thought it'd be better to write it all down in a book so he'd never get caught in the lies he had peddled. You've finished it! Rowena gasped, taking the book out of his hand. Of course. I needed some form of relief during the campaign, and you were not available, so... Harry smirked before pressing a kiss against the nape of Rowan's neck. The older witch moaned, and Harry smiled against her skin, knowing it was a sensitive spot for her. His hand that was squeezing her hips climbed up, but before it could reach its destination, Rowena pushed herself away from him. "Stop it. I've got a class coming up," said Rowena before pushing him out of the classroom. "That's no way to treat a man who returns from war with a present for his woman," Harry complained when she slammed the door shut. He could hear deep breaths being taken by Rowena from the other side of the door. "Come to my quarters at night," came Rowena's muffled reply. "Now go before someone sees us like this." Harry chuckled but complied with her demand. "All right, Rowena. I'll be going to meet Lady Helga. I need her help with something," Harry said before walking away. He found Lady Helga in her usual spot, tending to her garden filled with magical plants as well as everyday vegetables and fruits that kept Hogwarts fed. Lady Helga. Lord Hadrian. Back from your war, I see. Yes. Harry kept his hands behind his back as he carefully stepped into her garden. He could feel an undercurrent of disapproval and wariness from the older witch in her mannerisms. Yet, he kept that feeling aside and prowled on. "I came seeking your help, Lady Helga." "With the war? I'm afraid I'm not the one you should be talking to if that's the case." "Salazar would be a better choice," said Helga without looking up from her work in the garden. "It's not related to the war. I'm seeking your help to increase the yield in Muggle farms." "Increasing the yield, you say?" Helga looked up from harvesting the roots of a plant in the garden to stare at Harry. "Yes. Most of the Muggle villages under my protection are underdeveloped and incapable of feeding the Muggles. Cut off from the rest of the settlements of the kingdom, they'll starve without a higher farm yield. I've already used several warming charms to protect the crops from the cold, but your expertise in herbology would help me lift the rationing of resources allocated to the Muggles," Harry explained. "Dragon dung in sufficient quantities in tepid water would help turn a barren land into fertile ground in a matter of days." Ah! Harry had forgotten all about using that avenue with the Red Queen being a resident near Hogwarts. "I'd also have to apply some spells on these lands to regulate some of the extreme properties of dragon dung. That means I'll have to travel to these villages, which would separate me from Hogwarts and my work here." "You could teach me," Harry suggested. "You're right." Helga suddenly smiled. "That saves all of our time." "No. It saves your time." Harry grouched in his mind but didn't show his displeasure outwardly. Besides, learning new magical spells was always fun. Harry stood outside the oak doors of Rowena's room. He raised his hand to knock on the door but hesitated at the last moment. Women had historically enjoyed much freedom before the Roman Church started cracking down on the feminine in the world. But that doesn't mean there weren't stigmas in ancient cultures. Relationships outside marriage were frowned upon, but he didn't see much attraction in confining carnal pleasures solely to the marriage bed. However, that was his opinion. In this place and age, a woman's reputation was easily tarnished compared to the modern era, though such situations were not non-existent. Rowena was not merely a woman he found attractive. She was also a friend and someone he deeply admired. So, he was evaluating his current position. Ultimately, his dilemma was for naught because the door swung open, and Rowena pulled him inside before slamming the door shut. "Well, that was unexpected," Harry muttered. He took in Rowena's flushed face in the dimly lit room. Her red hair was swept to a side, falling over her right cheek like a curtain. She was dressed in a plain white gown that barely reached her knees. "Was it?" Rowena asked, raising a delicate eyebrow. "Then what do you say about this?" She smashed her lips into his own, taking his breath away. Lemon scene happened. A fire cackled in the fireplace, which was the sole source of sound in the room save for their heartbeats. Harry stared at Rowena, who also had her eyes open as they lay in bed. The skies remained dark outside, but he knew it was early morning. "What?" Rowena asked. "Nothing. You look beautiful," said Harry. "Did Helga agree to help with the farms?" Rowena asked while drawing circles on his back with her fingers. "She agreed to teach me some spells that'd help increase the yield. She also agreed to supply some potions that'd help to increase the fertility of the soil as well." "I see." So, you'll be staying in Hogwarts for a while. Why? You want me in your bed for the next few nights. Ow. Harry winced when Rowena dug her nails into his shoulders. I can't afford to stay away from the conquered villages. There is still work to be done, and I've sent spies to Constantine's court to glean their actions. And most importantly, I need to build an army to defend our gains and enforce our rule on the lands we take. Harry saw a thoughtful frown adorn her face. An army, you say? I have an idea to solve that dilemma, but it'll be a little unorthodox. Rowena warned. I love unorthodox ideas, said Harry, poking Rowena on her nose playfully. Now, let's hear this idea of yours. Chapter 94, Amassing an Army. When you said you had an unorthodox idea, I didn't expect this. Harry said, keeping his eyes open at the clearing ahead from the top of a tree. If you want a strong and trained army to fight against the Muggles, then the Goblin army is the better choice, said Rowena. I don't think it's a good idea to involve the goblins. They won't be interested in fighting under my command after what I did to their army. That's where you are wrong. Goblins respect two things, wealth and power. You've proven yourself capable and powerful by decimating their army. You stand to become wealthy after you've crowned yourself king of all Scotland. I don't think we've decided on that. Harry shook his head. Well, I have, and so have the people of Hogsmeade. These lands have never had a king of magical blood. You've managed to unite more people and conquer more lands than any wizard had done in living memory. You're the king of Scots in all but name. The students have even started to call you Dragon King. Monarchies are an unstable form of governance. Look at the Muggles. They kill each other in droves because some idiot tells them to, said Harry with a derisive snort. Then create another form of government. Maybe use the governance model of Valyria in this new polity you're creating. Rowena suggested, forcing Harry into silence. That is not as easy as it looks. A ruling council must have a shared vision and the resolve to set aside their personal differences to achieve the common good. That's a difficult balance to achieve most of the time. Then I suggest you crown yourself as king but also create this ruling council in the model of Valyria. You could keep the council in check while the council could keep your power in check. The system of checks and balances could form out of these two pillars of power in the kingdom. Rowena suggested. Harry gave the suggestion some serious thought. He was not ignorant of the fact that a new kingdom in Scotland that works as a sanctuary for pagan culture and magical communities could become a target in the long run. Under such threats, a singular leadership that could make quick decisions to mobilize resources and armies to defend the nation and withstand the test of time was necessary. Under the current geopolitical scenario, the best form of government to preserve the new Scotland would be a kingdom where a king and a Wisengamot could share power. He could see that such a dual form of government could offer long-term political stability and equip the kingdom to face the challenges ahead. Maybe Scotland could expand its borders and kick out Rome's influence in its entirety from the British Isles. A new kind of power could rise on the European continent, and that could change the world forever. For ill or for good, only time could tell, and Harry was the least bit bothered by such speculations. Are you interested in making me king so you can become the queen? Harry teased. So, you've considered making me your queen. Rowena turned the tables on him expertly. I'll give it some serious thought if your idea pans out. After all, a queen must be witty, cunning, merciful and wise. Harry said sagely. Movement in the clearing attracted their attention. Harry saw a small delegation of goblins in the distance carrying a white flag of truce. Looks like they seem to be in a talking mood. Harry muttered. Snipshank is far more reasonable than his predecessor. But I suggest we stick to the matter and avoid bringing up the battle. Rowena advised. All right, Harry said before taking her hand in his. Harry assumed his spirit form and allowed it to encompass it over Rowena. Together, they surged upward into the blue sky, leaving sparkling gray smoke in their wake. They fell from the sky and hovered above the ground before reforming their physical body a few feet from the goblins. Harry took in the armor-clad goblins while maintaining a firm grip on his wand. Lady Ravenclaw. Lord Targaryen. King Snipshank. Harry observed the crowned goblin king. Like all typical goblins, this one sported the standard pointed teeth and a crooked nose. But he couldn't make out the rest of the physical features of the head as they wore steel helmets save for their slanted eyes. All 4 goblins in the delegation were barely 3 feet tall, and he was being generous with their heights. But these goblins were clearly warriors, or at least they worked out because their physical characteristics spoke of their martial culture. Their bodies were stocky and filled with muscles. He supposed their wicked-looking axes and hammers were not for show. You asked for a meeting, Lady Ravenclaw. Say your piece. Our peoples have warred for centuries, spilling magical blood. But what if we can come together as allies against a common enemy? You speak of the Muggles? Snipshank asked coldly. Yes. Together we could. Rowena started but was cut off. You want us to fight your battles? No. Not at all, King Snipshank. We hope to reclaim these lands from the Muggles and establish a kingdom of wizards. But there is so much land under Muggle control. We could divide the lands claimed equally between our people upon victory. Rowena offered. Harry only kept an ear out for the conversation between Rowena and the Goblin King. His true focus, however, was on the guards of Snipshank. More specifically, their minds and the secrets they hid in their wicked little minds. When he finished skimming through the surface thoughts of the goblins, Harry knew what he had to do. You think too highly of your people's capability, Harry said coolly while looking down on the Goblin King. What? Snipshank snarled at the insult to his people. Hadrian, what are you doing? Rowena asked worriedly. I can't see any other reason why you'd think having some weak fools of your kind hide away like rats under the ground and hope to entrap us with your weak juvenile magic, Harry said with a snort. What? How? Snipshank spluttered before his brain finally realized the gravity of the situation. Attack! Yeah, right. Harry snorted before using the blasting curse on the ground. The goblin delegation was blasted away by the explosion while Harry placed a shield around himself and Rowena from the debris. Rowena, will you keep these fools bound for a moment? I've got some pests to kill. It'll be my pleasure, said Rowena before channeling magic through her stave and binding the Goblin King and his guards under the hold of a stone golem. Harry walked a few paces away from Rowena and touched the tip of his wand on the ground. He dipped into the magic in his body and connected it with the magic in the natural world. Keeping a clear picture of what he wanted in his mind, Harry began uttering a spell in Parseltongue. The ground underneath him shook as the enchantment took effect. The tremors on the ground stopped, but a radical change happened. The greenery that surrounded the clearing vanished instantly, and in its place, there was smooth white marble from one edge of the forest to the other. That should do it. Harry nodded to himself before standing up from his crouch. What did you do, wizard? Snipshank snarled. I transmuted all the land a few feet down into marble. Yes, I turned this land into a tomb of your precious warlocks, Harry said coldly. No. Snipshank looked at the white marble in horror. Yes. Your people are now taking their last breath of air in a dark place where they can't see or move. They'll scream at the top of their lungs, but no one will hear them. They'll call out to their king and wonder why they're abandoned. They'll reach out with their magic to feel a bit of hope that's never there, said Harry, bending a knee so that he was level with the trapped Goblin King. Instead, they'll die blind, deaf, and dumb when they should have been enjoying their life in a land ruled by those gifted with magic. All because little Snipshank thought he could destroy what I'm about to start. We offered you peace and an alliance. Why would you reject it? Rowena asked, staring at Snipshank with a disappointed look. Because he'd like to live in a world where the wizards are nothing rather than something, said Harry. Your kind is an abomination, a mistake. You should have never existed. You are wrong. Snipshank snapped. I see. Then let me tell you a little secret, Goblin. I will build the most beautiful castle the world has ever seen in this place, atop the tomb of your people. I will build a throne fit for myself and my descendants here, and your kind will call me king, as will the wizards, the muggles, and every other creature that breathes in these lands," Harry claimed while glaring into the slanted eyes of the Goblin King. "You are delusional. No goblin worth their name would call you king," Snipshank yelled, straining against the restraints. "That's where you are wrong," Harry smirked before standing to his full height while pointing his wand at the goblin. "You will be the first to do so. Imperio." The goblin army was barely 2,000 strong. But numbers didn't bother Harry that much. He was expecting such a low number, especially after some mutinies. As expected, Snipshank's decision to join the wizards in the battle against the Muggles was unpopular. Harry had hung back and watched as some goblins mutinied and fled Snipshank in protest when he declared his intentions to fight the Muggles. Of course, Harry could never allow a breakaway goblin army to crop up a new goblin kingdom in his lands. Therefore, he had to wipe out all deserters of Snipshank's army without any mercy. It was cruel and not gentlemanly, but Harry had no intention of getting bogged down in a cycle of war against different breakaway groups of goblins for the rest of his life. He already had the massive hostile Muggle populace of the islands to contend with. After securing the aid of Snipshank and his army, Harry returned to the villages under his control with the goblin army in tow. As expected, the Muggles could not locate the exact position of the settlements because of the Muggle-repelling wards he erected. But that doesn't mean the Muggles were not making the lives of the villagers any more difficult. King Constantine had sent an army of 700 men strong to reclaim the villages. They patrolled the roads to other parts of the kingdom, forcing Harry to suspend all trade with the outside world. The only reason they had survived so far was because Hogsmeade and Hogwarts were keeping them supplied with all the essentials and traded for valuable commodities. They blocked all the major trade routes to our villages. While Constantine's men have not found the villages, they're keeping watch on the roads," Keith explained, pointing at several roads on the map laid bare on the table. Harry didn't say anything and merely observed the enemy positions on the map. It looked like the Muggles were slowly surrounding the lands close to Hogwarts. The Muggle-repelling wards kept Constantine's army miles away from any of the villages under Harry's control or Hogwarts. But having the war drag on for too long was not smart. Besides, Constantine was not the only king who posed a threat to magical beings in the British Isles, nor were the many kings the sole threat. "We need to attack these 3 villages where the army is concentrated simultaneously." Peleus pointed to 3 villages on the map where their scouts claimed to have seen more soldiers. "It won't be easy to dislodge Constantine's army and secure the village from," Keith started, but Harry cut in. "We won't be needing these 3 villages intact," Harry said before turning his sights on the silent Goblin King in the room. "Snipshanks. It's time for the goblins to enter the field." The Goblin King nodded before leaving the room silently. "But my lord, the goblins, they'll show no mercy," Keith said worriedly. "Good. We need Constantine to take our threat seriously. Once word spreads of the battle, he'll be forced to gather a large army and perhaps even lead it against us. We'll save ourselves months of war if we're lucky," said Harry before calling the meeting to a close. The Goblin army was brutal in its attack against the 3 villages and spared nothing after the battle. They killed anything that moved in the villages and left nothing to stand after the soldiers were killed off. After looting anything of value from the villages, everything was set on fire. Harry watched dispassionately as screams tore through the battlefield as the goblins ransacked the villages. He had left the goblins to conduct warfare on their own terms to take the pressure off Snipshanks. Even if Harry had the Goblin King under the Imperious Curse, the rest of the goblins were hardly impressed by their king's decision to join the wizards to war against Muggles. Having the goblins thrown into battles kept them from rebelling against the current arrangement. He needed their cooperation until Constantine was defeated and Scotland was liberated from Muggle rule. Harry was confident he could make some inroads into the goblin community within that time frame. Harry was hoping to take advantage of their greed for power and wealth in the coming days. Harry walked through the burnt remains of one of the villages after the fighting subsided. The goblins had torched everything to the ground, and Harry had to use the bubble head charm to avoid the smoke. Half-burnt bodies were strewn across the streets, which gave Harry the urge to throw up. Despite that, he braved the streets as he owed it to himself to see the aftermath of his decision. So far, his war had always been with minimal war crimes and deaths. Keeping the Muggles alive had been one of his prime concerns, as he found value in their lives, and he knew Muggles could contribute immensely to the benefit of the kingdom he was building. But this time, he had allowed wanton destruction and indiscriminate killing to unfold, and he needed to see it with his own eyes to ensure that he learned the actual cost of war of this scale. He walked the length of the destroyed village for nearly an hour before returning to the camp set outside, where the goblins held a few prisoners. Harry found the prisoners shivering in fright, surrounded by goblins armed to the teeth. Before the battle, Harry had asked the goblins to capture the priests from the church, and thankfully, they followed through with that order. "I have a message for your king, priest," Harry said while coldly staring down at the priest. "What do you want, monster?" the priest stuttered out after gathering some courage. "Imperio." Harry returned to Hogwarts to oversee the dragon dung being transported out to the fields under his control. He also had a few things to set up in Hogsmeade, like recruiting a lot of builders to start building his castle. The workforce that built a massive castle like Hogwarts was a sure bet in raising his grand new castle. Therefore, he made sure to recruit some of the best builders he knew for the castle. He also had plans to build a new city around the castle in time, which required some advanced planning and space allocation. There was also the need to discuss the finer points of what a new Kingdom of Scotland would look like with the founders. It was also a convenient excuse to spend some time with Rowena during her free hours. "So, you want to create a council of wizards and witches mimicking the one you told us about in the Valyrian Freehold?" Helena asked with a pensive look. Something like that. I call it the Wizengamot," Harry said with a bright smile, earnestly looking at the founders for their opinion. "Where will you find worthy wizards to fill this Wizengamot, and what powers does it have?" Slytherin questioned. "I have 4 worthy wizards before me now. The rest will be picked to represent a specific locality within the kingdom. As for powers, I envision the Wizengamot becoming the chamber where new laws are proposed, discussed, and voted on," Harry explained. "I'm sorry, Hadrian. We cannot join the Wizengamot. It'll interfere with our work in Hogwarts," said Godric, shaking his head. "What? Don't be ridiculous. You are some of the best healers, potion masters, battle mages, and enchanters. To top it all off, you are educators. Your voice must be heard in the Wizengamot." "I think our voice is aptly represented, Hadrian," said Godric, nodding at Rowena. "Of course, Rowena's opinions and advice are highly valued and taken into consideration. But I require people with wisdom and differing opinions in the Wizengamot for it to function productively," Harry argued, but it was for naught. All 4 founders were adamant to keep themselves away from a seat in the Wizengamot despite Harry's repeated attempts to influence them. He even offered to create a law that'd ensure Hogwarts would remain an independent entity without any interference from the state. But even that refused to make them change their opinion. He went a few steps back and even offered a seat for a representative of Hogwarts, but even that got rejected. Harry was flummoxed when Salazar Slytherin, a man who was famed for looking for traits like ambition and cunning in his students, was the most adamant in rejecting any position of power in the Wizengamot for Hogwarts or the founders in their individual capacity. But he managed to extract a promise from the founders that they'd join the Wizengamot when they stopped working in Hogwarts. He had no intention of leaving the founders out of the Wizengamot. He was confident he could convince them to join the governing body in time. Harry spent most of the next 2 weeks in Hogsmeade. If he was not overseeing the construction of his castle, he was training with the Red Queen. Riding a dragon was far different, and Harry was intent on using the dragon in the war. As Rowena pointed out, he was the only wizard to have bonded with a dragon, and he wanted to milk it for all it was worth. His wait, however, came to an end when Harry got word from his spies. "My lord. We got word from our spies. King Constantine has called all his banners. He has started gathering his full army like you wanted," Peleus reported. Harry was immediately on his feet, feeling satisfaction at his plan having its intended effect. He had sent the corpses from the goblin attack to Constantine with imperused priests to spread every gruesome detail of the attack. The priests under his control were also ordered to stir up religious fervor to force Constantine's hand. By the looks of it, his plan worked like a charm, forcing the Muggle king to commit most of his forces in a decisive battle. It'd have been hell to fight all his opponents spread out in the kingdom, and by Constantine calling all his banners, Harry got the opportunity to destroy and capture the Muggle army. It was now time to put an end to the Kingdom of Alba. Very good. Let's begin. And I plan to write 8 chapters on Harry's time travel. I've reached the 9th chapter. I could go on for another 5 at max with the plots in my head, but I'm winding it up in the next chapter with a time skip. Chapter 95, The King of Scotland. Are you sure that'll work? Albus asked, staring at Croaker expectantly. It'll work, Dumbledore. Croaker said firmly. I only ask because the last few times were a failure, and I get the feeling Fawkes would be less inclined to spare me his flames. The trill from his companion, who was entrapped in a contraption, sounded like a promise of bad things to come if Fawkes was hurt. As I told you before, Dumbledore. The last few times, our calculations were way off. We didn't take into account that the branch reality could be developing a temporal dissonance as it branched away from the main timeline. A temporal dissonance? Albus asked curiously. Mr. Potter's arrival has created a branch reality that occupies a unique space and time, connected to our reality by a common past but at the same time far away from us because of the differences. Do you understand that? Yes. Albus nodded. Then you understand Mr. Potter has inadvertently become the focal point of change within this new reality. Every action he takes is creating ripples in space and time. It is affecting other people, and those people are making decisions that deviate from their future selves. These differences or anomalies in the past have created more distance between our reality and the branch reality. Does that make sense? I suspect what you are saying is that as Harry makes more changes in the branch reality, that reality is branching farther away from our reality. So, there is more distance between our reality and the branch reality than, say, last day. Essentially, yes. Croaker nodded slowly. But it's not just Mr. Potter. He must have affected other people's lives since his arrival. Those changes are also reverberating across reality, making this branch reality farther away from our own. I see. Does that mean Harry has spent more time in this new branch reality than we experienced? Albus asked. I can't say for sure. There are no specific laws for space and time. If there was, we didn't know about it. In my experience, the laws that bind time and space are fluid in nature. They're always in a state of flux, always unpredictable. Croaked explained. Yet, you claim you can retrieve Harry. Sirius barged in with a cold stare. Albus could see the man was apocalyptic and, therefore, chose to keep his silence despite Croaker's hopeful look. How can you retrieve Harry when you don't even know whether he is in the past or the future? Sirius asked furiously. Do you know what happens when you cast a spell, Lord Black? Do you truly know what happens? Croaker asked. I'm not here to get lectured on magic. Sirius thundered. It has been nearly a month. I want my godson. I assure you. Mr. Potter will be brought back. We've toiled day and night to make this work, Lord Black. Today, you'll be leaving with Mr. Potter from the ministry. Sirius growled one last time before walking away while muttering darkly under his breath. Albus watched Sirius join Damian Greengrass and Minister Bones in a corner of the chamber. Of all the people who had worked strenuously to bring Harry back, Damian Greengrass worked the hardest. The man had not only obtained time turners from beyond Britain but also got expert wizards from across the many wizarding communities of the world. That's probably why Minister Bones made Damian Greengrass the head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. Albus thought. However, he felt there was something driving Lord Greengrass. Albus recognized some of his paranoia stemmed from the Greengrass family's sudden closeness to Harry and Sirius. After Voldemort's fall, he had been responsible for keeping Harry insulated from the unwanted attention of several elements within the wizarding world. Of course, his protection was necessary as Harry was a little child barely able to make coherent sounds on his own. Even if he had let Harry grow up among the Dursleys, it would have been a kinder fate than what would have happened had a wizarding family raised him. But now, things have changed. He knew Harry was more than capable of taking care of himself. The fight in the Ministry atrium proved Harry was ready to stand against Voldemort and all the challenges that lay ahead. It was his hope that Harry could succeed where he failed and overcome all the odds that were arrayed against him. Nonetheless, he could not help but worry for Harry. He had once abandoned his family, and Albus has lived with the consequences of that decision till now. He could not do the same to Harry, whose parents died because he failed to destroy Voldemort. The endless resources that Damian Greengrass was magically pulling into London were concerning. It's true the Greengrass family stayed away from the Isles during the war. But to amass such connections to not only make different ministries cooperate but also share their resources. Albus trailed off in thought. Shaking his head, Albus put such thoughts at the back of his mind. For now, he focused on getting Harry back safely. His worries went to Harry's condition in the branch reality. From what he had observed so far, the chances of Harry getting into the future were slim. If their current reality were not a branch reality, then the future would remain unknown to everyone. Under such a circumstance, Harry was most likely stranded in the past. How far in the past was a question that could only be answered by Harry. But his worry was the time Harry spent on this branch of reality. If too much time had passed in the branch of reality, then Harry might have started a life of his own in the new world he found himself in. It'd be cruel to wrench Harry back from the branch reality. But most importantly, Albus knew Harry would have comparatively a safer in normal life in the branch of reality than in this world. Albus. We're ready. Croaker suddenly said, snapping him out of his thoughts. He kept his concerns in a dark corner of his mind and instead went straight for Fawkes. His trusted Phoenix companion was dressed in a small black jacket lined with runes with no beginning or end. Are you ready, old friend? His trusted Phoenix trilled a hopeful note that lifted his spirits. I hope everything works as we hope for Harry's sake and our own. Albus muttered before taking Fawkes towards Croaker. Croaker chanted something under his breath and, together with the unspeakables, both foreign and British, used a spell against the suspended sphere of energy that swallowed Harry into a different reality. The barriers that were keeping the sphere contained flared to life as the sphere rapidly expanded. Albus could see the wizards straining against the sphere as they manipulated it to suit their needs. Unlike many of the last attempts, this time, the sphere collapsed in on itself to form a whirlpool that began sucking everything inwards. Dumbledore. Now's the time. Remember, it has to be quick. Not a drop of time should be wasted. Croaker shouted over the whirling sound of the portal opening. You know what to do, Fawkes. Albus said, petting his friend on the head. Bring Harry home. Fawkes bobbed his head before turning himself into a ball of fire. The unspeakables lifted a portion of the barrier, allowing Fawkes to slip in, and he disappeared into the vortex of space. What now? Sirius asked. Now, we wait for Fawkes to return with Harry, said Albus, looking expectantly at the whirlpool that was ever so slowly expanding. Albus hoped there were no hiccups and Harry returned safely. If they could not return Harry, then all hope was lost for the wizarding world. There was far too much at stake. Company, release! Peleus shouted at the top of his lungs. The siege engines lining the cliff released as one, throwing huge round rocks carved with runes courtesy of the goblins. He'd have never imagined the goblins would give up their weapons of war for the benefit of wizards. But impossible things tended to happen under the reign of his king, Hadrian Targaryen, the first of his name, King of Scotland. Hundreds of rune-enforced boulders fell on the ships from the kingdom of Bernishnisha. The stones began exploding with terrifying power once they fell on the unsuspecting enemy ships. Planks of wood splintered away as ships were blown to 3 or more pieces under their assault. Arm the catapults, he shouted. He could hear the screams coming from the shoreline as the men of Bernishnisha faced their worst defeats in the sea. Peleus could sense the desperation and fear of his enemies. It was only natural for them to feel this way. His king had spread fear in their home islands as his armies marched in all directions, expanding the newly formed Scottish kingdom. Constantine's defeat at the Battle of the Dragon, as it was called, was the deciding moment when the kingdom of Alba was done away, and in its place, the kingdom of Scotland emerged. All across the countryside, dragon banners rose within a month as King Hadrian enforced his control by turning his kingdom into an impenetrable fortress. No one could enter or leave the Kingdom of Scotland without the king's permission. The following year, the army of Scotland gathered to invade Dalriada. With the former army of Constantine under King Hadrian's control, the fall of the many tribes in Dalriada was almost inevitable. Despite being the center of Christian expansionism, Dalriada was rife with factionalism between different tribes and the chieftains that led these tribes, like in the old days. But the main reason his king attacked Dalriada instead of Moray or Strathclyde was to gain access to the vast naval fleet in the region. With the entire region of Dalriada assimilating into the Kingdom of Scotland, they now had access to the North Channel and possessed a large fleet of ships. The rapid expansion of the kingdom had spooked the surrounding kings of Moray, Strathclyde, and Lothian. An invasion attempt from the Highlands was expected by the king by the spies in Bernicia. But what surprised them was a naval invasion from their enemies supported by the Vikings. For years, his king had tried to court Vikings as allies, but they had joined with the enemy. Peleus was relieved the Vikings had joined the enemy. He was not fond of Muggles, and the less of their kind in the kingdom, the better it was in his mind. Looking at the screaming men desperately trying to land their rowboats, Peleus could only scoff in derision. Where did the vaunted ferociousness of the Vikings go? Company, release! Another volley of boulders took flight from the cliff, bombarding the Vikings and Bernician army. The siege weapons of goblins were terrifying, and Peleus was relieved the goblin army was on their side instead of fighting against wizards. He didn't know what his king did to earn the allegiance of the goblins, but there were rumors of a single combat between King Hadrian and Snipshank. Whatever the case, goblin weapons were highly effective in combating Muggle armies. This is why the Goblin army was deployed along the Scottish kingdom's borders to destroy Bernicia's invading army. Peleus oversaw a few more volleys, wreaking havoc on the enemy fleet. The Muggles could not properly execute their amphibian assault because his king knew their landing site beforehand. The few that landed on the beach were unlucky, and his thoughts were proven correct when a huge cavalry force rode into the beach with dragon banners in hand. The screams from the Muggles and the clash of steel filled the morning sky. He ordered the assault to stop as the king's army was now pushing the enemy into the sea. The battle at the beach quickly turned into a one-sided slaughter. Even if the Vikings were ferocious fighters, they were outnumbered 10-1. Those were odds that even the best of armies could not easily overcome with the sea at their back. Peleus' attention shifted to the surviving ships in the enemy fleet. They were not even attempting to rescue their stranded brethren. Seeing the losing fight, the ships turned away from the disastrous battle to flee and survive the day. A guttural roar came from the north, making Peleus and his men look back. From the clouds, a giant red dragon glided through the air towards them. His men began hollering the king's name to the heavens as King Hadrian, atop his draconic mount, passed by the cliff at great speed and dived down the edge of the cliff. Peleus doubted he was the only one to feel a surge of glee and satisfaction as his king swept away the remnants of the enemy fleet on his dragon. The men under his command screamed and shouted in jubilation as the king's dragon breathed out a long line of fire that broke several ships trying to make their escape. For someone who had only known the taste of helplessness and defeat, the string of victories under his king tasted like the sweet wine of Hogsmeade. Peleus hoped it was a taste that'd never leave his tongue. Harry scoffed as the Muggles and the enemy ships tried to bring down his dragon using their archers. Steel-tipped arrows only bounced off harmlessly against the magically protected hide of the Red Queen. His dragon opened her maw wide and breathed dragon fire upon the ship that dared to attack her. The screams of men and the smell of burnt flesh and wood were kept at bay from his nostrils by the bubblehead charm. But that didn't prevent his dragon from inhaling the smoke and the scent. Letting out an unhappy growl, the Red Queen flapped her wings and put some distance between her and the ship she was intent on destroying. She breathed out another globe of fire at the ship as it started to come undone at the seams. The ship broke by its center as wood burned away under the intense heat of dragon fire. Water began rushing into the ship, dragging it ever so slowly underneath the sea. Harry's attention was taken away from the sinking ship when an arrow was stopped by his magical shield. The red cloak he had on his back flared up with runes once again, producing a shield of energy that stopped more arrows. He found the culprits on a rowboat busily arming themselves with more arrows when they realized their first salvo was ineffective. Going by their attire and the color of their hair, Harry assumed the men were Vikings. Harry snorted when the Viking archers tried their luck once again by shooting arrows at him. The Celtic runes woven into his cloak flared to life again, making the arrows bounce off harmlessly against an energy barrier. No Muggle weapon in existence could bypass the protections enchanted by my wife, Harry thought as he took careful aim with his wand. Bombarda Maxima. The rowboat was blown to bits, as were the soldiers who didn't have the presence of mind to jump from the boat when he cast the spell. He began to similarly destroy any stray ships or boats that were trying to escape the trap he had set for them. The flames of the Red Queen burned and set the sea alight, turning the small pocket of the sea into a burning oven for his enemies. Many of his enemies begged for mercy, but Harry had none to spare. He had graciously offered the Viking raiders a peace deal that would have allowed them to keep the Highlands of Moray and Ireland. He had offered them an alliance of equal partners and preference in maritime trade, but they had spurned his generous offer to side with Bernish-Nisha to attack his lands unprovoked. He could have understood if the Vikings had disregarded his offer of alliance, as he was new to kingship and the Kingdom of Scotland was newly formed. But to attack his lands when he extended them the hand of friendship. Well, there is only one thing left to do. A total purge of the Vikings from all the islands and even Ireland. Harry vowed. The war didn't end at the sea. There was a host of Bernician soldiers trying to invade his lands, but magic kept them at bay, and then he unleashed the goblin army on them along with some wizards. It was a one-sided slaughter that decimated the Bernician army and opened up the Scottish lowlands for further invasion by his army. When Harry marched his army into the lowlands, he faced little resistance. One by one, villages, towns and castles fell under his control. He took the church officials, lords and knights as his prisoners and wiped their minds clean. The churches were either converted into temples of learning or soup kitchens for the children. The former church officials were tasked with increasing literacy rates by functioning as educators and surveyors for the crown. They were also charged with undoing Rome's hold on the populace. Harry had seriously contemplated the introduction of a new religion to replace the old one, but he left that idea on the back burner as he was not entirely sure what could replace the existing Christianity and whether it'd be of benefit to the people. Bernish-Nisha eventually came under his control when the Bernician king was captured by his soldiers before the man could escape to Strathclyde. There were disgruntled and wary eyes in Strathclyde that Harry was not prepared to address at the moment, so the capture of King Malcolm of Bernish-Nisha was a boon in his eyes. With the capture of King Malcolm, his campaign in Lothlin came to a close. The complete subjugation of Lothlin was unfinished, as the purge of church infrastructure and doctrine was incomplete. But that was a time-consuming process, and Harry left some of the work to his apprentices and the royal army. His army would go around the newly conquered area, imprisoning church officials and having them transported to the capital of Scotland to get brainwashed. All it took was a memory charm and some memory modifications to get the former church officials to become loyal servants of the Scottish crown. After the fall of Bernish-Nisha, Harry was forced to spend some time on the newly conquered land to ensure Strathclyde did not develop any ideas to invade his lands. To that effect, he erected Muggle-repelling wards that blocked major passes that'd facilitate army movements to be on the safe side. He preferred to act against Strathclyde as soon as possible and gobble up the kingdom into his expanding Scottish polity. But Harry was forced to re-evaluate his strategy now that he knew he had to contend with the Vikings. There was a need for a strong fleet on the North Channel and the North Sea. It was not imperative to strike at Viking positions in Ireland and have them dislodged from their entrenched positions. Harry was starting to see the danger of weakening the Christian kings too much if the Vikings were hostile to the Kingdom of Scotland. This'll need to be discussed in the Wisingamat, Harry mused. It was with such thoughts that he returned to his capital city of Valyria. There was a celebration going on when he entered the city walls. The celebration of Scotland's victory over Lothian was indeed an occasion for great revelry. The captured former king was also paraded through the city's paved streets, but of course, the former monarch was welcomed into the city with dignity. There was a ceremony where Malcolm had to voluntarily submit to the crown and accept subservience to the Scottish crown. But all those ceremonies or the politics of the kingdom fled his mind as Harry entered his castle. A bright smile overtook his face as his wife and son waited for him near the doorway of his throne room. "Rowena. Alexander." Harry pressed a chaste kiss on his wife's lips and another on his son's forehead. "Make sure I'm not disturbed for the remainder of the day," Harry ordered his advisors and servants. For the remainder of the day, he spent his precious time mostly entertaining his son and sharing some intimate moments with his wife of 2 years. The entire day he spent with his family as he had missed the warmth of his wife and the joy of holding his son in his arms. When night came, Harry slept peacefully in bed with Rowena in his arms. The next day, Harry was greeted by dark clouds in the sky. At first, he thought the sky would clear itself once it rained. But the sky remained filled with dark clouds and fierce winds while rain eluded them. He got the distinct feeling that the rain was waiting to pour on them to disturb the ceremony. When it was time for the ceremony to begin, arcs of lightning started dancing in the sky. Fearing a fierce storm was brewing, he ordered the ceremony to speed up. The former king of Bernishnisha was forced to kneel before Harry's throne and offer his crown and sword. After giving an oath of allegiance to the Scottish crown, Malcolm was allowed to leave Valyria for his home. When Harry, along with his court, came outside the castle to see the departure of the former king of Bernishnisha, the storm that was brewing in the sky took a turn for the worse. A giant vortex started to form in the sky, surrounded by dark storm clouds that made everyone uneasy. The clouds gathered around the vortex as if shielding it from something. "Rowena, take Alex inside," said Harry. "What is it?" Rowena asked worriedly. "I don't know. Maybe it's a thunderbird," Harry said, but he doubted that was the case. Suddenly, a whooshing sound reverberated across the land as the vortex in the sky suddenly became pale white and started emitting rainbow colors. "Yeah, definitely not a thunderbird," Harry thought. He took his wand into his hand, ready to face whatever was brewing in the sky. To Harry's surprise, the whooshing sound stopped abruptly, and a phoenix song filled the air. "What the hell?" Harry's eyes widened as he saw a familiar phoenix exit the vortex in space. The soldiers around him unsheathed their weapons while the wizards produced their wands and staff, but Harry stopped them from acting against the phoenix as it flew towards him. Instead, Harry offered his arm for the bird to land. "Fox." Harry breathed in surprise once the phoenix landed on his offered arm. The flaming bird let out a trill that sounded like a happy greeting to Harry's ears. "I don't understand. How did you come here?" Harry breathed out in amazement. Fox shook his head before he climbed onto his shoulder and rubbed his head against his cheek. "Harry?" Rowena called him cautiously. "It's all right. Fox is a friend from home," Harry said, smiling at his wife. The air around him suddenly simmered, making Harry's eyes widen. Bright gold flames started to cover him like a cocoon, making Harry look in panic at Fox. "No! Stop, Fox!" Harry shouted, but his attempts to dissuade Fox from teleporting fell on deaf ears. The golden aura completely encompassed him, and in the next moment, he felt like he was being squeezed through a small tube at breakneck speed. His body felt like it was being melted off, and his ears could only make out a high-pitched scream. Harry had to shut his eyes as he could see an explosion of colors that threatened to make him blind. He didn't know how long he was subjected to the assault on his senses, but when it finally ended, he was on his stomach on a smooth marble floor. "Harry! Harry, my boy! You're safe, lad. Up now." Different voices bared down on him, but he could not discern who was talking or where he was. His eyes were out of focus, and he could only see dark spots in his vision. His legs gave out, and Harry fell, allowing darkness to claim him. Chapter 96, Summer Holidays. "You know you could have warned Hermione," said Tonks. Sirius looked at her incredulously. "Are you kidding?" "I told her not to go in there." She didn't listen. Sirius shook his head helplessly. "You could have explained it a bit better," said Tonks, cringing slightly as more shouting and the sound of glass and furniture breaking could be heard throughout Grimold Place. Sirius looked troubled for a moment before shrugging his shoulders and lying back down as he held a wet cloth against his broken nose. "Where is Creature?" "I told him to bring me the—" Sirius was cut off by an abrupt popping sound near the couch he was lying down. "Did the Blood Trader Master call Creature?" Sirius was so startled by Creature's sudden appearance that he nearly fell off the couch. "Creature brought the potion for Blood Trader Master," Creature drawled, holding out the small vial of green potion in his hand. Sirius plucked the vial with a growl while Creature popped away after shooting him a nasty grin. "One of these days, I'll wring his neck," Sirius grumbled as he poured the green sludge over his nose. The essence of Dittany worked its magic within a few seconds after he poured it over the bridge of his nose. The bleeding stopped altogether, and when Sirius looked himself in the mirror, he found the skin had knitted itself back together. "Harry, no! Stop it! I meant—" Sirius looked up as he heard Hermione's voice getting consistently high-pitched and closer as seconds trickled by. He found the curly-haired teen floating down the stairs and unceremoniously dumped on the wooden floor on her back with a distinct thud. "Harry, I know." Sirius abruptly cut in before Hermione could dig a bigger hole. "I warned you to give him space. But, he's so different now," Hermione said, her lips quivering as she looked up the stairs with a frightened look. "Well, that's because Harry is different, Hermione. If we experienced 3 weeks without him, Harry spent 3 years wherever he went. Whatever happened there affected him deeply," Tonks explained as she helped Hermione to her feet. How do you know that?" Hermione asked with a gasp of surprise. "That's because Harry shouted that before punching Sirius in the nose." Tonks snickered. "I have so many questions," said Hermione, looking expectantly at Tonks. "Yeah, you're not the only one." Dumbledore said Harry might have grown accustomed to life at the place he went, and his abrupt departure from the place might be causing him some misery. Sirius explained. "Really? How does that even work?" Hermione asked with an inquisitive look that rubbed Sirius the wrong way. "You'd have to ask Dumbledore," said Sirius with a shrug of his shoulder as he made himself comfortable on a plush chair. "Did Harry say anything else?" Hermione asked, turning her sights on Tonks once she realized Sirius was not expanding on it further. "Nothing. He has been moody and silent ever since he came back," said Tonks, hugging a cushion close to her chest. "And he punched me in the face," Sirius added. "We can't let him spend the whole summer cooped up in his room," said Hermione, staring at Sirius and Tonks earnestly. "You're right, of course. But give him some time to come to terms with his situation," Hermione said Sirius, patting the girl on her shoulder. "He'll speak to us when he's ready." Despite Sirius' hope for Harry's return to normalcy, it didn't happen in July. The month ended unceremoniously, giving way to August, and still, Harry didn't change his attitude. Even Dumbledore tried his hand, and Sirius had never seen Dumbledore getting pushed out so violently with magic. If the headmaster hadn't countered with his own magic, the man might have broken his back against one of the walls of the Black Manor. "This is not healthy, Sirius. Something must be done," Andromeda said as she walked back and forth inside the drawing room of Grimold Place. "Don't you think I know that?" Sirius asked in frustration while rubbing his temples. He threw Hermione out of his room and had her levitated down the floor. "He nearly blasted Dumbledore through the wall, and I got punched in the face. I got electrocuted for my efforts to get inside his room." Tonks raised her hand not to be left out. "He only lets in Hedwig, Creature and Dobby, but that's mostly for food, cigarettes and fire whiskey," Sirius said grimly. "To think that I thought I was moody and self-destructive after escaping Azkaban. I was nowhere near this level of depression." "I think it's time that we asked Damien to send his daughter," said Andromeda after a brief moment of silent contemplation. "Are you insane?" Sirius asked with an incredulous look. "In his current state, I don't know what he'll do to the girl." He won't harm her. They were involved, were they not? Andromeda asked with a frown. They were, but not for the last 3 years from Harry's perspective. Do you really want to make this more complicated? I see no harm in it to try. Andromeda shrugged. No. Sirius decided. It's too dangerous. We don't know what happened to Harry when he was away, and I don't think it's a good idea to throw Daphne against Harry and hope for the best. We'll not be throwing her against Harry. We'll tell her and Damien the truth. Let them decide the rest. Andromeda suggested. Sirius just shook his head. He was sure Harry could regain his bearings by himself, and he certainly didn't want Daphne to get hurt by seeing the state Harry was in. He also feared the girl would push Harry too much, and there was no way to predict how Harry would react. It was the only reason he kept denying Daphne's requests to see Harry all these days. Sirius, I'll keep an eye on her when she's with Harry. Tonks said earnestly. The girl is not a helpless maiden, Sirius. She went with him to the ministry to confront the Death Eaters. She's brave and strong enough, said Andromeda, staring at him pointedly, daring him to disagree with her. In the end, Sirius caved in to Andromeda's suggestion. Taking a handful of flue powder, he threw it into the fireplace. Greengrass Manor. Daphne had spent the entirety of July rife with worry after she learned what happened to Harry inside the ministry. At first, her father had tried to hide what exactly transpired, but he eventually caved in after her persistent attempts. After that, each day was filled with worry and helplessness until finally, Harry was rescued from the spacetime anomaly that took her boyfriend away from their reality. Now, she learned Harry had closed himself off from the rest of the world for some reason. She did get the gist of it from her father, who informed her about the time disparity Harry endured. According to her father, Harry looked older than when they last saw him. The Unspeakables also shared the possibility of Harry's attachments to the people in the branch reality with her father. So, Sirius' call about seeking her help to bring Harry out of his self-imposed incarceration inside his room was not surprising. She had been trying every day to get Sirius to let her speak with Harry. It was only when they had mucked up for a whole week that they allowed her into Grimmauld Place. You should have let me see him earlier, said Daphne, glaring at Sirius once she stepped out of the flue. It's not as simple as it sounds. Harry is different than you remember. Sirius just shook his head as he exhaled out to calm his nerves. I suppose your father told you the gist of it. Yes. Daphne said impatiently. Where is he? Upstairs. Tonks will come along for your safety. No. Daphne put her foot down. I don't need anyone's protection. Daphne, you don't understand. I know how to take care of myself, and I don't need anyone protecting me from Harry, of all people. Daphne said firmly. Sirius let out a tired sigh and led her upstairs. Just be on guard, Daphne, said Sirius before knocking on the door to Harry's room. Sirius stood back, and Daphne moved towards the door. Harry. May I come in? Daphne waited patiently outside for an answer. Whatever, came the muffled reply after a few minutes. She opened the door and let it close behind her. The room was submerged in darkness from top to bottom. It was as if someone stole away all the light. Harry. She tentatively called as she made slow and careful steps inside the dark room. The urge to light up her wand was there, but she held back, afraid it'd annoy Harry. Harry, I can't see anything. Daphne said as she tentatively made each step forward. Suddenly, a small globe of light flickered into existence before her eyes. Wow! That's new, she muttered under her breath as she carefully moved forward. Daphne could see Harry sitting up in his bed with his back to the wall. There was a strong stench of smoke in the room as she came closer to Harry's bed. She saw the ashtray on the bedside table filled to the brim with ash and the remains of Muggle cigarettes. She never understood Harry's fascination with Muggle cigarettes when wizarding smoke tubes were available. The globe of light floated upwards until it hit the ceiling, where it stayed, lighting up the room. You seem to have picked up a few tricks. Daphne commented in an attempt to break the ice and regain her bearing upon seeing the physical changes in Harry. Her comment didn't elicit any response from Harry. Instead, she took a closer look at her boyfriend. Harry was far more rugged-looking than she remembered. He was also taller and even grew a beard. His hair was long, and she could see that his eyes had grown only brighter. Or maybe that was because Harry had foregone wearing his glasses. His arms looked well-defined, and his chest and abdomen were packed with muscles. Dark bangs covered his forehead, shielding the lightning bolt scar in half his right eye. There were dark bags underneath his eyes, signaling a lack of sleep. In short, Harry looked older and tired in her eyes. "You look different," Daphne commented as she untied the green robe from around her shoulders and hung it near the nightstand. The yellow summer dress she had underneath allowed her more freedom of movement. She carefully sat on Harry's bed and kicked out her shoes from her legs. "I wish I could say the same about you," Harry murmured. "What makes you think so?" "I grew half an inch this summer. But Astoria had me beat with a solid 1.5 inches," Daphne said with a shake of her head as she crawled into the bed and joined Harry. Daphne heard a distinct snort from Harry, which gave her more confidence. Harry positively responded to her presence, which was a win in her books. She rested her back against the wall as she sat beside Harry. Daphne held back a smile when she saw a ghost of a grin tugging at the corner of Harry's mouth. "So, care to share why you've imprisoned yourself in the darkness?" Daphne asked, arching her eyebrow while looking at Harry. Instead of answering, Harry picked up another cigarette and began smoking it in her presence. It was a signal that he was not interested in having this conversation with her, but she did not come here to be so easily dismissed. Daphne reached out, plucked the cigarette from Harry's mouth, and took a drag. A second later, she regretted doing that as she began coughing. "I don't know how you can stand this thing," Daphne croaked out between coughs. "No one told you to use it," said Harry, taking the cigarette out of her hands. But she was not so easily cowed. She snatched the cigarette back after he took another puff, and this time, she managed to smoke without an issue. "I really don't see the appeal in this," Daphne commented, blowing smoke out of her mouth. "Then give it back." Harry tried to retrieve his cigarette, but Daphne held it out of his reach. But first answer me, what do you hope to gain by locking yourself in a dark room?" Daphne eyed him critically. "You don't know what happened, what I lost," Harry whispered. "You're right, I don't. No one knows until you tell them, but I won't force you to speak of it. However, is hiding away inside this room going to change anything that happened?" Daphne asked rhetorically. Daphne observed her boyfriend closely as he stared into the distance and thought. "Have you given any thought to what the Dark Lord is planning at the moment? While you shut yourself from the outside world, your enemies gather strength, Harry. Your sudden disappearance from the ministry also disturbed your plan with Bellatrix." When she said that, Harry looked at her with a sudden realization. "Lestrange. You still hold her?" Harry asked curiously. "Yes. Under the draught of living death as we planned. It took all my father's political goodwill with Minister Bones to declare Bellatrix was captured by the ministry. Minister Bones had been hounding my father for days to know why we were keeping Bellatrix as a prisoner. We can't answer that because only you know the true reason." "She's healthy, right?" Harry asked. "For now. If we're to make any moves, we must do it soon. Shutting yourself in this room won't solve any problems. You need to come out no matter what transpired while you were gone." "Time waits for no man," said Daphne. She watched Harry take a deep breath before letting go. "You're right, of course." Harry rubbed his temples tiredly. "I need to sleep." "I'll make sure you get your sleep," said Daphne. "How do you expect to accomplish that task?" Harry arched an eyebrow. Daphne pushed him off the wall, making his head hit the pillow. A moment later, she was by his side, drawing the covers up over their bodies. She pulled his head close against her neck and rubbed soothing circles on his back with her left hand. Her free hand paid attention to his head as her fingers glided through his long black hair. "Sleep, Harry," Daphne softly whispered as she held him close. No matter how much she insisted, Harry didn't sleep for more than 5 hours. But those 5 hours were nerve-wracking for her as he was thrashing and mumbling in sleep, suffering from a nightmare. The urge to use a potion was there in the back of her mind, but she held back as she felt it was better this way. She was confident Harry could pull himself out of the current situation. They skipped lunch as they were in bed, but when evening came, she suggested they go out for dinner. At first, Harry was reluctant to follow through with her suggestion, but he eventually caved in before her perseverance. She stepped out of the protective wards surrounding Grimmauld Place and stood beside Harry. "Where are we going?" Harry asked once they were outside. "Somewhere far away from here," Daphne said with a scowl as she noticed the ridiculously transparent attempt of Sirius and Tonks trying to follow them. "You seem to be in a foul mood," Harry commented airily. "That's because I'm being teased by your mean relatives. They've been making insinuations that we were doing something inappropriate in your room. Deal with them," Daphne said impetuously while glaring at the bush where Sirius and Tonks hid. "Sirius, leave us be," Harry said with a sigh. "Can't do that, Harry. You don't know how dangerous our islands have become as of last month." "Don't worry too much, Sirius. The islands will know how dangerous I become soon enough," said Harry, pointing his wand straight to the sky. With a bang, the night bus strolled into the driveway at breakneck speed. It halted abruptly once it neared Harry and Daphne. "Oh, hey there, Harry. Ernie, look. We've got Harry Potter with us," Stan Shunpike shouted in excitement. "You remember me, Harry? I'm Stan Shunpike." "I haven't forgotten," said Harry. "You hear that, Ernie? Harry Potter remembers me," Stan hollered excitedly. Daphne could see they had become the center of attention for the passengers of the night bus. Perhaps this was not a smart idea, Daphne muttered as she took a few steps back, intimidated by all the stares. "Come." Harry took her hand and walked inside the bus, forcing Daphne to follow. "Where to, Harry, old chap?" Stan asked in a wholly familiar manner as if they had been friends for a long time. Daphne looked suspiciously between Harry and the conductor. "Diagon Alley. It'll be 11 sickles each." "And who's your lady friend?" Stan asked, grinning like an idiot while looking at Daphne. "Stan, meet Daphne. Daphne, meet Stan." Harry proceeded with the shortest of introductions she had ever heard. Harry gave a couple of extra sickles than necessary before asking for a more private setting on the bus. Stan was all the more happy to oblige. Once they settled into a cabin that warded them off from the rest of the shady passengers of the night bus, Daphne let out a relieved sigh. She sat across from Harry inside the cabin. Harry placed sticking charms on their body just when the night bus sped away with a bang. "We should have gone to Muggle London. That'd have been far safer," Daphne muttered, shivering in fright as chaos ensued inside the night bus. Seats were moving freely, and she often saw a few wizards getting smashed into the glass cabin that separated them from the rest. "No, it won't. Muggles are facing constant attacks from Dementors, werewolves, vampires, and Death Eaters." "How do you know that?" Daphne asked curiously. "I might have sealed myself inside a room, but I read the wizarding in Muggle papers. I've also been listening in on the conversations in the house. I suppose you know everything that happened then." "Not everything." Harry leaned forward in his seat so that he was looking straight into Daphne's eyes. "What does your father say?" "He says thank you for destroying the giants. The Ministry is stretched thin responding to the Dark Lord's attacks. The priority of the Ministry is now to contain the war rather than fight the Dark Lord head-on. Most Ministry employees work around the clock to keep the statute of secrecy," Daphne explained. "So, Minister Bones has been entirely useless." Harry frowned before dropping his shoulders in disappointment. "I don't know why I expected more from her. She managed to force the Death Eaters out of the Wisingamot using the wartime powers of her post. All previously convicted Death Eaters have been declared enemies of the Ministry. The Aurors are also empowered to use deadly force while confronting Death Eaters and other dark creatures aligned with the Dark Lord. Daphne suddenly came to the defense of Madame Bones. She didn't particularly favor Madame Bones, but the woman was far better than Fudge. She also inherited a dismantled and incompetent ministry, and only 1 month had passed since her ascension to the post. Seeing the curious look Harry was directing at her, she rushed to explain. It has only been a month since she came to power. Also, my father talked about Minister Bones' attempts to involve the ICW in the war. It won't be long before other ministries offer assistance to combat the Dark Lord's forces. Asking for military assistance from ICW member states is all fun and good, but how'll we know those that come to our shores are not sympathizers to the Dark Lord's ideology? Harry asked. I suspect that's why the ministry has so far not given any clearance to outside entities to operate inside our borders. Daphne mused aloud. Harry let out a non-committal grunt but otherwise remained silent. Daphne knew he had some misgivings about Madame Bones because of her involvement in Sirius' case. Even she shared those same concerns, but if not Madame Bones, then who? Her replacement would not be any better. She suspected Harry also realized it on some level. Just thinking about the stuff she heard from her father about the internal state of the ministry gave her nightmares. Nepotism, recommendations, and bribes were the real currency from top to bottom in the ministry. Honestly, she was surprised Minister Bones managed to keep Harry's disappearance a secret till now. Enough about politics. Now, tell me, why are you not wearing your glasses? She asked. Anything to keep Harry's mind off depressing subjects was her goal. In time, she was sure she could bring back the old Harry, who was confident and strong. The one that she truly loved. Chapter 97, The Rise of House Potter. You could postpone this, you know. Sirius said with a troubled look. No. It has waited long enough. It's time for House Potter to emerge from obscurity. Harry said, nodding at the completed Potter Manor while sitting on a bench in the garden. Winky popped next to their side and offered them orange juice. Thanks, Winky. Harry smiled at the elf, who happily nodded at him before skipping towards Dobby, who was working on watering the plants in the garden. Don't you think you're setting up the manor for Voldemort to attack? It'd be better to ward the property using the Fidelius charm. Sirius suggested. Harry shrugged his shoulders. On the contrary, I'll not use any wards on the property. Sirius stared at Harry with wide eyes when he heard that. Are you mad? It'll be like a beacon goading Voldemort to attack this place. Sirius said with alarm. Perfect. I want that party to happen within 2 weeks, said Harry, taking a sip of the orange juice, completely disregarding the incredulous stare from Sirius. 2 weeks. Harry, what are you doing? Sirius was on the edge now with worry. He feared what was going through the mind of his godson. Just blatantly disregarding all dangers was not how Harry operated. What? I've restored Potter Manor, and I want to hold a party to celebrate its revival, said Harry like it was a trivial matter. Okay. Sirius took a deep breath. Then we can hold a ball inviting the people we trust. We can limit the invites so the word never gets to Voldemort's ears. No. I'll have the date published in the Daily Prophet and send public invites. The party will be open for all. Sirius just gaped at his godson with a flabbergasted look. But before he could say anything else, Harry's friends came out of the manor. So, how does it look? Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. Is it okay for me to admit I'm jealous of your game room? Cedric asked. That's the prevailing opinion among many people. You're, of course, free to visit whenever you wish, Cedric. Any man who can take down Rabaston Lestrange with a blasting curse has an open invite to the manor lasting a lifetime, said Harry. I'll hold you to that promise, Harry. Cedric grinned. What about you, Neville? Harry asked. Well, there are too many fountains. Neville said hesitantly, looking around the garden. Let's say that those fountains might come in handy soon. Harry said with a wink before turning his sights on Tracy. You could have gone with fewer lion sculptures. Tracy commented. Well, let's just say. Let me guess. They have a specific purpose as well. Tracy drawled. Yes. Harry unashamedly agreed. Tracy sighed and looked at Daphne. Honestly, what do you see in him? In a vulnerable moment, I took pity on him, said Daphne, rolling her eyes. Maybe it's because of the Raxperts. They have the power to mess with your head. Luna airily said, making everyone goggle at her. These sakura trees are a nice touch. Tracy admitted, staring at the pink flowery trees in the garden. That was thanks to Sirius' fiancé. I'll have to think up a good gift for her. Harry mused aloud. All right, kids. I want your attention. Sirius said while clapping his hands. Someone please tell my godson that it's a bad idea to hold a party in the manor with an open invitation. You're doing what? Neville gaped. When everyone is trying to keep their heads down, why are you painting a target on your back and inviting you-know-who to attack this place? Asked Cedric. Do you fear the Dark Lord? Harry asked, casually leaning back against the bench. Of course I do. Are you saying you don't? Cedric frowned. Anyone who does not fear Lord Voldemort is an idiot with a death wish. The man is a sorcerer with decades of experience. But fear doesn't mean I should run away and put my life on the ice. Harry, you'll be painting a huge target on yourself if you publicly declare Potter Manor's rebuilt status. Tracy slowly said as if she was speaking to a child. He might attack you and your guests. He might even burn down your home. I'm counting on his arrival. Harry smirked. Tracy rolled her eyes and stared at her friend with folded hands. Honestly. What do you see in him, Daphne? Not only is he an unthinking Gryffindor, he's also suicidal. Hey! Neville protested. Oh, come on, Longbottom. Tell me I'm wrong. Tracy challenged. Neville looked at Tracy and then at Harry apologetically before shrugging his shoulders. She has a point. At least tell us you have a plan. Cedric said earnestly. Oh, I've got a plan. Harry said confidently. But Voldemort is not one to be underestimated. He'll be cautious after what transpired in the Ministry. So, what's the plan? Tracy asked with a skeptical look. Does it involve getting blasted into the past and returning as an old man? You'll see. Harry said enigmatically, letting her jab at his older appearance pass. Maybe we could hold the celebration elsewhere instead of risking your newly built home. Sirius suggested again. We'll be holding the party here as well as your wedding. I think enough delays have pushed back your wedding with Bridget, said Harry. Sure enough, Sirius' postponed wedding plans became the center of discussion instead of the impending party or Voldemort. Before long, his friends departed one by one, leaving only Daphne and Sirius in his home. Harry took a stroll through the manor with Sirius and Daphne accompanying him. The floor was layered with red granite that gleamed under the sunlight, while the walls were made of pitch-black stone. The windows were stained with a multitude of colors from chamber to chamber with intricate artworks. Sumptuous adornments, plush cushions, detailed curtains and rugs of velvet covered the manor, and all of that was Daphne's selection with some help from Tracy. You'll need to fill in the wine cellar. It won't be much of a wine cellar if there is no wine, fire whiskey, or butterbeer in it. Daphne pointed out. Can you make a list of wine that? I'll be happy to. Daphne said eagerly. Adopting a bashful look when he looked at her amusedly, she defended, I know a thing or two about wine. All right then. I'll leave the wine cellar in your capable hands, said Harry, happy to dump that work on Daphne. You'll also need to add more chandeliers and furniture. Having some wall scones should also lighten up the place. Daphne suggested. All the furniture will be delivered by tomorrow, but I don't know about the chandeliers. Seems a bit excessive to me. Sirius commented, taking an apple from the fruit bowl and taking a bite. I agree. I'm not a fan of candlelight. I've another thing in mind, said Harry. What other thing? Sirius asked curiously. He is just itching to show off his lighting stones, Daphne said with a snort. Sirius perked up. Lighting stones? It's just something I've been working on for Smokeless Light, Harry explained. But, scented candles are the best. People buy them because of their fresh scent, Sirius said, looking lost. Don't bother. He just wants to show off his rune skills, Daphne said with a sigh. Hey! Do you want to help me send out the invites, or are you too busy disparaging me? Harry asked. It took an entire week for Harry to invite some prominent personalities in the wizarding world. In some cases, Harry sent an invite using L-Post, but in rare cases, he personally went to invite them and their families. The Wisengamot members in the ministry got a personal invite from Harry, and it was also a convenient time for learning apparition. Though he had the capability of flight, apparition was a faster mode of transportation. He also visited some of his friends and their families in person to deliver the invitation cards. The first family he saw was the Weasley family. They were the first family to host him in the wizarding world, so Harry felt it was better to start from the roots. It was followed by the Lovegoods because their house was closer to the Weasleys. After that, he visited Cedric and his parents to deliver the invite in person. Tracking down the rest of the knights proved to be a hassle as most lived in the Muggle world. So, he stopped delivering invites in person after tracking down Katie Bell's home. The rest of the invites went by OWL or using the Flu network except for one last invite. It was the one he reserved for the Minister of Magic. But before he went to the ministry to deliver the invite in person, he had to do one more thing. Taking a handful of Flu powder, he threw it into the fireplace of Potter Manor. Rita Skeeter's office, Daily Prophet. The yellow flames turned green for a brief moment, and Harry allowed the flames to wash over his face. Rita. Harry Potter? Harry took notice of the woman on his payroll. I'll be at the ministry meeting with Minister Bones. You might get an interesting bit of news if you're not tardy, said Harry before abruptly cutting the call. With a flick of his wand, he vanished the flames and sealed off the Flu with wards. With that tip-off delivered, he set forth to Grimmauld Place to find Sirius. While he had every right to be confident in his abilities in case of any Death Eater, he was not foolish enough to discard the help of another skilled wizard. Therefore, he picked up Sirius along for the ride, and together, they arrived at the ministry. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Sirius asked once they were in the lift. I still think this is a terrible idea. Was it a bad idea to sneak into the Department of Mysteries and remove the Prophesy Orb? If we hadn't acted and hoped Dumbledore's half-ass plan to post some untrained wizards as guards would work, then Voldemort would be in possession of the orb. We could have never exposed him to the public. Harry pointed out. This is different, Harry. You're directly daring Voldemort to attack your home. What is to say that he won't use his entire army to overwhelm you with sheer numbers? I've planned for that scenario, Harry said. I think you're underestimating Voldemort and his army. His Death Eaters might be fresh recruits, but he has the allegiance of werewolves, vampires, dementors and other dark creatures. I've accounted for them as well. Trust me, you'll be pleasantly surprised by my preparedness should Voldemort take the bait. Harry promised. I hope you're right. Because I don't think James and Lily will let me off the hook in the beyond if something happened to you. You sound like a mother hen, Sirius. Are you sure you're a marauder? Harry asked with a chuckle. I'm pretty sure even your father would say this is madness. Sirius muttered. You want to do what? Amelia Bones looked at Harry like he was the dumbest person on planet Earth. As I told you, Minister. I've restored Potter Manor, and I'm holding a party. A party? Are you insane? Minister Bones shouted. The thought had crossed my mind, Sirius said while eyeing Harry from the corner of his eyes. Harry merely shook his head and made himself comfortable on his seat while watching Minister Bones walking back and forth behind her desk, muttering something under her breath. Do one thing, Mr. Potter. You send an invite to the Dark Lord while you're at it. Madame Bones grumbled as she angrily sat back in her chair. I don't have his address. Harry drawled. Do you care to know that we are at war? Minister Bones thundered. That's your problem, Madame Bones. You thought the war started last year. As far as I'm concerned, it never ended, and I've been fighting it ever since I stepped into the wizarding world. Harry said, forcing the Minister of Magic to fall silent. The party will go on as planned. You're cordially invited to attend the party. Good day, Minister, said Harry, climbing to his feet and extending the invitation card to the minister. Tell me, Mr. Potter. If the Dark Lord attacks your home during this party of yours, what do you think will happen? Minister Bones asked with a raised eyebrow. Harry grinned at the leader of Wizarding Britain. The last time we dueled, Voldemort lost his arm. Maybe this time, he'll lose his head, Harry said with a shrug. Minister Bones let out a long-suffering sigh when she heard that. I'll have an aura detail posted outside your home if you're intent on going through with this party. Harry let out an internal scoff. The auras were most likely to cut loose and run or join in with the Death Eaters if there was an attack. It's unnecessary, but do what you must, said Harry. However, I've got a request. Let's hear it then. I'll need a blanket pardon for my actions from here on out. Minister Bones looked gobsmacked by the demand. Pardon? What for? She asked incredulously. You don't expect me to fight a war and destroy the most powerful Dark Lord born in our isles with the disarming charm or the stunning charm, do you? Harry asked with a pointed look. I don't have the power to. Minister Bones started protesting. Of course you do. Wartime powers allow the Minister of Magic to pardon someone without a trial. Harry cut in. That provision only applies to hit wizards and aurors under my command. It does not apply to a civilian. Minister Bones argued. Then it's quite simple, isn't it? You can accept me as a hit wizard. Harry smiled triumphantly. Tell me he's joking. Minister Bones looked at Sirius. I wish that was the case, Sirius said with an uneasy look. Minister Bones took a deep breath before staring at Harry with a troubled look. You look like I'm asking you to sell me your firstborn minister. You'll do as I ask, yes? It'll only benefit you in the end. Think of all the publicity you stand to gain when the news breaks that you recruited the Chosen One into the Ministry's army against Voldemort and his Death Eaters. You mean the one where I get grilled by the Wisengamot for recruiting an underage wizard into a branch of the DMLE, flouting laws and traditions that were followed for centuries? Minister Bones said, her eyes twitching with irritation. Ah, you forgot, Minister. I'm no longer underage. Harry waved his hand dismissively. That's true, Minister Bones said, looking intrigued at the possibilities that now lay open before her. All right. I think it's a reasonable request to issue pardons for using lethal force against the enemies that you face, Mr. Potter, considering we have a war to win. But I can't issue a blanket pardon no matter the circumstances. I'm sure we can come to an understanding of sorts on the scope of legality should I use deadly force against the Death Eaters, said Harry. Yes, an understanding would be perfect. Minister Bones nodded with a sigh. Now, I need to know something. What VE you done with Bellatrix Lestrange? You'll soon have her in your possession, Minister. But when I'm finished with her, I'll deliver her to you. For now, know that I need Bellatrix to make Voldemort vulnerable. Harry cut in smoothly. After the meeting with Minister Bones, Harry and Sirius made a swift exit towards the Ministry atrium. Many eyes followed their every move, and Harry kept a tight leash on his magical power to keep himself from reacting. In the branch reality, he was used to people bowing and scrapping before him. It came to a point where some of the muggles and even wizards started to see him more as a god or a demigod rather than a powerful sorcerer. The constant battles he was involved in had also taken a toll on him, as he was always in a warrior mode most of the time. Anything that made him fall back into those instincts made Harry very uncomfortable. While occlumency had helped him recover somewhat, years of behavioral patterns could not be quickly suppressed over a few weeks. Thankfully, they passed by the people in the ministry without incident until they found Rita Skeeter and a photographer by the fountain of magical brethren in the atrium. The resident bug journalist was in her element as she skipped past many in the crowd and positioned herself before Harry and Sirius. Her quill and a notepad were out in a flash, and the photographer positioned himself behind her. Mr. Potter. Mr. Potter. Rita Skeeter for the Daily Prophet. Do you think you have a few moments for some questions? I suppose I could spare a few moments of my time. The people are calling you the chosen one. Do you agree with that title? Rita asked with a sparkle in her eyes. No. Harry answered shortly. Any particular reason? Rita asked with a strained smile. Harry knew the woman was only trying to get something juicy out of his mouth and making the most of the chance. I've got a wonderful name. I urge people to use that instead of silly titles made up by some interesting personalities. Here, Harry stared pointedly at Skeeter to get the point across. There are rumors that there was a prophecy in the Department of Mysteries, which was why you were fighting the Dark Lord in the atrium. Is this true? Yes, there is a prophecy, and yes, that's why we were dueling. I won't be sharing the details of that prophecy, and no, it's not in the Department of Mysteries. I've taken custody of the prophecy so it won't fall into the wrong hands. He answered truthfully. Harry saw no reason to deny any knowledge of the prophecy. Frankly, he saw no reason to publicize the prophecy either. Whether Voldemort knew its contents or not didn't make much difference. Either way, Voldemort wouldn't stop trying to kill him. For now, the only use of the prophecy was the psychological warfare aspect. The fear of the prophecy's contents kept Voldemort in flux, making him act irrationally. So you admit you're destined to fight the Dark Lord? Rita asked excitedly. I wouldn't call it destiny. Voldemort chose to attack my family more than a decade ago. He set everything in motion. You could say Voldemort chose his destiny that night when he attacked my family at Godric's Hollow. Rita Skeeter just smiled wickedly as she furiously scribbled on her notepad. Why did you come to the ministry, Harry? She suddenly asked, switching to a topic he wanted all along. To meet Minister Bones and deliver an invite in person. An invite? Harry furnished a card he had made for the public. Potter Manor was destroyed after my grandparents passed away during the last war. I've restored it to its former glory to the best of my abilities. Though I had lost all my family's precious history and my ancestors' portraits, I believe it'll be a new beginning for House Potter. Therefore, I cordially invite you all for a party to celebrate the restoration of Potter Manor on the 20th of this month. More details are available on the card, and I hope everyone can partake. Skeeter had more questions, but Harry was on a schedule here. He had one final invite to deliver, and that required him to visit Hogwarts. It was finally time he checked in on Albus Dumbledore. Chapter 98. Meeting the Slug. Why? Why did you do this? Dumbledore asked earnestly, with a look of concern shining in his blue eyes. Harry looked at the front page of the Daily Prophet, where his invitation card was printed in bold letters under the headline that read, Harry Potter, the Prophesied One. He had to admit Skeeter had gone out of her way to captivate her audience using a flair for dramatics in retelling their conversation. She cooked up an entirely new story for the prophecy all by herself to augment the drama involved. According to Skeeter, Merlin crossed into the mortal plane from the afterlife to deliver the prophecy of the Chosen One to Dumbledore and the Potters. Then she spun another fantastical tale of how Peter Pettigrew heard a portion of the prophecy and reported it to the Dark Lord. She then connected this half-knowledge of the prophecy as to why Voldemort attacked the Potter family. Rather than taking offense to the false tale spun by Rita Skeeter, Harry found himself impressed by her narrative skills. Skeeter should try her hand at writing fictional stories. Harry mused. Harry, are you listening? Dumbledore asked, looking rather frustrated. I came here to invite you, Headmaster, to the party I'm hosting at home. If you have the time to spare, please pay a visit. Are you all right, Harry? Dumbledore asked with concern. I'm quite fine. Thank you. I don't think so, Harry. How do you explain this? Dumbledore shook the paper he was holding for emphasis. What is there to explain? Harry raised an eyebrow. Don't you see the danger you'd invite with this act, Harry? Lord Voldemort will take this as a challenge. He will attack you and burn your home to the ground. Dumbledore said earnestly. Harry snorted as he stood up from his seat and walked closer to the vacant stand where Fawkes was supposed to stay. I've been constantly in danger from the moment I stepped into these halls. I didn't see you warning me not to return to Hogwarts. So, don't you think it's a little late to warn me about any dangers? Harry raised an eyebrow at Dumbledore. For once, the Hogwarts headmaster had no answer and observed silence. Look, Harry. I'm only concerned for your safety. Harry outright laughed at Dumbledore's face when he heard the word safety from the man's mouth. No, you're not Dumbledore. Your concern is not for Harry Potter, an orphan boy. No, your concerns and actions have always been in the interest of your beliefs on what is best for the boy who lived and your petty war against Voldemort. You're wrong, Harry. Dumbledore disagreed. I do care about you. I don't think so. Else, why would you? Harry stopped himself at the last moment before spilling the beans about the Horcrux stuck in his head. Harry? Dumbledore sat forward in his seat, looking expectantly at him. But Harry was distracted by something else as he got a glimpse of Dumbledore's blackened hand. He is afflicted with the withering curse. That means... Harry thought as the realization set in. Harry? Dumbledore's voice brought him out of his musings. After clearing his throat, Harry addressed Dumbledore. There is no point in arguing about this, headmaster. The party will go ahead as planned. Harry said firmly. You're putting yourself and everyone that arrives for the party in grave danger. Look around you, Headmaster Dumbledore. The wizarding world is in danger as long as that madman lives. Harry said with a scoff. No one is safe when vampires, werewolves and dementors are wreaking havoc in public while Death Eaters are spreading terror in the Muggle world. Then cancel that party. Voldemort will only find incentive in attacking such a large gathering to sow more terror in the minds of the people. Dumbledore pleaded, but Harry just shook his head. You had the ability, political clout and resources to destroy Voldemort's support base all these years. Yet you chose to do nothing and allowed them to walk freely simply because of misguided morals and cowardice on your part. Harry, please. You don't understand what I faced. I understand more than enough, Dumbledore. I had a long and fruitful chat with Bathilda Bagshot. She had many stories to tell me about you, Grindelwald and Ariane. The way Dumbledore just froze up filled Harry with more confidence. You had your chance to destroy Voldemort and his cronies. You failed. Now, I'll try my hand, but it'll be my way. You can sit back and watch as I wage war against Voldemort, not out of some misplaced notion of saving the foolish masses of the wizarding world but out of my own self-interest. It's not as easy as it looks, Harry. Trust me. I understand. I wish I could have done more so that no one else had to bear this burden. Dumbledore said with sorrow. I have a right to live freely, just like everyone else. I have the right to have a family like everyone else. I'll fight for those rights, and I'm prepared to kill Voldemort and his entire army if that's what it takes. Yes, you have that right, my boy. And I wish you live a far better life than this old man. But understanding your enemy is important if you're to destroy him. Lord Voldemort is a powerful sorcerer who has gone farther than any dark wizard has gone before. Dumbledore said. Harry eyed Dumbledore warily as the man came forward from behind the desk and placed a hand on his shoulder. I admit you've come far ahead than I had ever hoped or envisioned in terms of sheer power and skill in magic. But our foe is far better, Harry. If you hope to defeat him, you must strike at the very foundation upon which Voldemort has built his power. Harry raised a curious eyebrow at Dumbledore. Have you not wondered, Harry, how Voldemort survived all these years without a body? I have. Harry nodded slowly. Then that's what we need to find out. His immortality is one of the major pillars that gives him strength and confidence. We must make Lord Voldemort immortal before a killing blow can be struck. Harry stared at the headmaster, who was looking at the pensive cabinet with a hesitant look. He was tempted to come out with the knowledge of the Horcruxes. It was true they could do so better if they could talk freely without keeping secrets from each other. However, he had to constantly remind himself that Dumbledore was the one who started this game of secrets long ago. Even now, the man was dancing around with what he knew instead of taking any proactive action. Dumbledore knew about the Horcruxes from at least Harry's second year or even before that. All this time, Dumbledore had sat on his ass and done nothing. The only move Dumbledore had ever made against Voldemort in this war was the destruction of the Ring Horcrux. Even that little bit of news was not shared with Harry. He was merely deducing that's what happened from the withering curse that was eating away Dumbledore. Harry's eyes inevitably fell on the Elder Wand, and the call of power permeated his mind. The Death Stick was his by right, and even now, Dumbledore was holding it just like he was planning to use Harry as a lamb for slaughter in the pursuit of Voldemort's destruction. More than anything else, that thought emboldened Harry on the spot to go ahead with his plans. "So, how do we stop him, sir?" Harry asked. "We must know Voldemort's past to understand the source of his immortality. For that, we must need someone who intimately knew Tom Riddle. The distance from Tom Riddle to Lord Voldemort is not great, therefore, we must secure the aid of an old friend." "Who is it?" Harry asked, already knowing where this was all leading to. "Professor Horace Slughorn is an old colleague of mine and one of Tom Riddle's favorite professors in Hogwarts. I had tried many times in the past to enlist his aid, but this time, I believe he'll come around with you by my side, Harry." "What do you want me to do, Headmaster?" Harry asked. Dumbledore shot him an enigmatic smile. "Do you have more of those invitation cards in hand?" Harry had expected Dumbledore to ask his aid in bagging Slughorn and bringing the old potion master to Hogwarts. But he didn't expect it to happen so soon. Dumbledore wanted to move today itself, which had shot down several of his plans. For one, he hoped to use Bellatrix to retrieve Hufflepuff's cup from Gringotts. Then there was the checkup on preparations of the defenses he had built in the castle to face Voldemort's army in case the Dark Lord chose to attack. Because of Dumbledore, he had to suspend the plan to retrieve the Horcrux the next day and clear off his evening schedule. But that still allowed him some time to assess the defenses in Potter Manor. "Is everything in place, Dobby?" Dobby happily bounced on the balls of his feet, nodding enthusiastically. "Everything is done as per your orders, Harry Potter, sir." Dobby found it difficult to arrange for other elves without Master's presence, but Winky and Creature helped to convince them you'll return. "Good. Winky told me you had difficulties recruiting the elves because of my absence. But you've done wonderful work, Dobby." "Thank you." "Dobby is happy to help, sir," the elf squealed happily. Harry smiled at his elf friend. Winky and Dobby were also affected by his abrupt disappearance. Perhaps they felt it more keenly than anyone else. They had carried on his plans for Potter Manor even in his absence, hoping he'd return one day. Together, they walked beneath the extensive tunnel system the dwarves had built as per his specifications. Harry walked further into the tunnels while Dobby continued to regale him with some funny stories about the dwarves not allowing the elves to clean up the place while they were working in this place. Dobby, however, stopped the many complaints the elves were making when they finally arrived at a prison cell inside one of the tunnels. Instead of being the lively little social butterfly Dobby usually was, he became withdrawn and tactically moved behind Harry with a dose of fear in his eyes. "Oh, come on, Dobby. Don't tell me you're afraid of this weakling." Harry snarked, and it had the intended effect on the woman who was keeping herself in a dark corner of the cell behind iron bars. Bellatrix rushed towards the bars of her cell with a deranged look on her face. "You mud blue. Infligo." The knockback jinx struck Bellatrix square in her gut, making her stumble backwards. "What have I told you, Bellatrix? You must behave in my presence and not call me any names." Harry tooted, shaking his head in disappointment, which only enraged the Mad Witch. "Your end is near, Potter. You and that blood traitor cousin of mine will face a horrible death." I'll watch with glee as the Dark Lord peel the flesh off your bones." Bellatrix screamed while thrashing against the body-bind curse Harry placed her. "You seem to have disturbing but impossible dreams in these dark tunnels." "Fear not, Bellatrix. I've come to put an end to this dark but unamusing chapter of your life once and for all," Harry said without missing a beat before nodding at Dobby. Dobby snapped his fingers, and the door to the cell swung open. Bellatrix bared her teeth and renewed her struggles as Harry stepped into the cell with his wand in hand. "You do not have the guts to kill me, boy. You're weak like your parents and that fool Dumbledore." Harry laughed at the obvious ploy of trying to get a rise out of him. "Oh, I've got no trouble in killing at all. I quite enjoyed killing off Voldemort's Death Eater pals when he was resurrected." "Do not speak his name," Bellatrix shrieked, glaring at him with the burning hatred of 1,000 suns. "Since you asked so nicely, I won't mention his name again. For the sake of our conversation forward, I shall call him Mr. Noseless from now on." "Arg! You dirty half-blood. You'll suffer for this insolence. The Dark Lord will come in. Mr. Noseless will do all sorts of terrible things to me." "Yes, I get your doomsday threats." Harry waves dismissively, which made Bellatrix frothing at the mouth. "No, I'm not here to speak of your impending death but about how to kill Mr. Noseless. The Drac Lord is all-powerful. My lord has triumphed death long ago," she said with a mad grin and a wicked chortle that came straight out of cliché ghost movies. "Does the Hufflepuff's cup in your vault would have anything to do with his immortality?" Harry asked innocently. "What?" Bellatrix froze while staring at him with wide eyes. It was the exact moment Harry launched an all-out assault on Bellatrix's mind that cut through her mind without any shred of mercy or concern. He cut through her attempts to block him out. He had to admit her mind had formidable defenses even when the witch was a deranged psychopath who was under the grip of continuous use of negative emotions to amplify the repeated use of dark magic. Bellatrix Lestrange was the prime example of the dangers of the continuous use of dark magic. He suspected the witch had most likely forgotten how to use less dangerous magic because of her fall from a normal mental state. The repeated use of dark magic gives rise to megalomania, which even Harry suffers to a certain extent but on acceptable levels. He had learned to suppress the egotism mostly thanks to the goblins and their warrior culture. The militaristic discipline among their race had somewhat rubbed off on him while he was in the branch reality. More physical activity and learning swordsmanship had allowed him to vent off some of the aftereffects of dark magic. But Bellatrix Lestrange was a witch beyond the edge of sanity. Yet, her offensive power was nothing to scoff at, even at the mental plane. But Harry didn't rise to his state of power without mastering his mind, body and magic. He tore down all attempts by Bellatrix to keep him out of her mind most cruelly. He could hear the witch screaming madly to the high heavens as he demolished her will without any concern for the sanctity of her mind. Images started to flood his mind as he gained total access to her mind. Harry cajoled her brain to ignore all the episodic memories and focus on the semantic memories. His will was enforced on her mind, and soon, he began to gain access to a lot of information. Digging deeper into decades of memories was difficult, as Bellatrix's mind was not emotionally stable. Some memories caused volatility within her mind, mostly related to her past battles. Harry carefully navigated around the memories of battles past, and with some effort and luck, he found what he was looking for. The memory of Voldemort awarding the Hufflepuff's cup to Bellatrix filtered into his mind, and from that thread, he accessed all memories related to the cup. Harry pulled back from her mind when he finally learned all the security measures enforced on the vault and the cup. "What ve you done?" Bellatrix gasped, looking pale white as she stared at him in abject terror. "I was merely confirming my suspicions. The cup contains Mr. Noseless' soul, and thanks to you, I know how to access the vault and deactivate the traps you've laid around the cup," Harry said, smiling brightly at the witch. "You'll never get access to the vault. Only I can get inside the vault, and I'll never betray the Dark Lord. I'd rather die." Bellatrix snarled even as blood trickled down from her nose. "I know. You're the most loyal servant of Mr. Noseless," Harry said sardonically. "Stop insulting the Dark Lord. Bellatrix screamed. Harry flicked his wand, and Bellatrix fell silent. As I was saying before, I was so rudely interrupted. I know of your loyalty to Mr. Noseless, and you'll never betray his trust. But I've methods to make you cooperate. You are nothing but a half-blood. You cannot do anything that'd make me betray my lord. Bellatrix mockingly laughed. On the contrary, nothing could be farther from the truth. I've subverted far terrible foes than the likes of you to my side, Bellatrix Lestrange. Harry's words were tinged with the weight of his magical power as he mustered his magic for a spell. Harry pointed his wand right between the eyes of Bellatrix with a green glowing aura at the tip of his wand. You have years of experience over me. You've traveled farther than myself in the vast, ever-changing frontier of the dark arts. You've had more practical experience in magical battles than me. I admit all that. In fact, I acknowledge you as a worthy, skilled, and dangerous witch. Bellatrix stared defiantly at him even as his aura manifested into a visible oppressive force that bared down on her shoulders. But the difference between your power and my power is as wide as the gap between the sun and the earth. Obliviate. Bellatrix's vacant eyes after the spell took effect gave him no pleasure. Harry hadn't wanted to go with the current plan, but he couldn't think of any other way to safely and easily access Bellatrix's vault in Gringotts. A distinct pop came out of nowhere in a dark alley, scaring away a cat rummaging inside a garbage can. I think we scared off a cat, Harry, Dumbledore said with some amusement. Shame we can't use the same technique to scare off vampires, werewolves, and Death Eaters, Harry muttered as he walked down the street with Dumbledore. Indeed, Dumbledore said with a chuckle. The lights lining the street flickered on and off as they walked towards a house in the distance. I couldn't help but notice you seem to have no reaction to apparition, Dumbledore commented. Sirius taught me to apparate this summer. It's mighty convenient than flying, but not as fun. Good. Practice regularly until it becomes second nature. Mastering teleportation magic would be a boon in getting out of a tight spot, and it's extremely useful in battles, Dumbledore advised. Harry merely nodded, appreciating the rare good advice that came from Dumbledore. That's the house. Dumbledore pointed at a small house covered in darkness, unlike the surrounding homes nearby. I can feel a vague aura of magic. It's most likely some form of concealing magic, Harry whispered. Your senses have sharpened, Harry. I'm heartened to see that you've not abandoned the simplest forms of magic in pursuit of powerful spells, Dumbledore said. Together, they walked into the home, which looked like it had been abandoned, and a fight had broken out. What do you think, Harry? Dumbledore asked while looking around the house's interior with the tip of his lantern lit with white light. It's quite a good illusion, but the caster forgot to use the dark mark, said Harry before asserting his magic over the whole house. Apparitium. The revealing charm consumed every nook and cranny of the house, and the concealment charm broke. The illusion around them peeled away, leaving Horace Slughorn standing in a corner where an armchair was supposed to be. Oh, bollocks. I should have moved yesterday. Slughorn cursed himself while throwing a dirty look at Dumbledore. It was a worthy effort, Horace. Very impressive. I assume you didn't have much time to put more spells and details without revealing yourself. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled merrily. I suppose I could have performed better, but under the circumstances. Slughorn looked at Dumbledore and then at Harry. Slughorn's eyes sparkled with recognition, and then a resigned sigh fell from his mouth. Perhaps I didn't have much of a chance to remain inconspicuous when faced with you two, Slughorn said resignedly. Oh, it was all Harry. I merely apparatus to a nearby alley, Dumbledore said distractedly while looking around the homes as if he was searching for something. Ah, of course. I should have guessed, Slughorn said with a beaming smile while looking at Harry. You're her son, after all. You knew my mother, sir? Harry asked politely. Oh, yes. Lily was absolutely brilliant. A professor is not supposed to have favorites among his students, but your mother was one of my finest students. Her skill and vivid sense of imagination was a marvel to witness when she applied them to magic. "I've been told she was highly skilled in charms," Harry said. "Oh yes. But not just charms. Her potions were a work of art." Slughorn reminisced with a gentle smile. "I've been told of that as well. Come, let me show you." Slughorn directed Harry's attention to a picture on a table where Slughorn and a young Lily Evans. It was taken during Lily's graduation. She was such a skilled witch. Lily was supposed to make such phenomenal contributions to different fields of magic. Slughorn said wistfully. "But then..." Slughorn trailed off, looking sadly at the picture. "Horace. May I use the loo?" Dumbledore asked innocently. "Oh, yes. Please be my guest," Slughorn said distractedly. Slughorn blinked rapidly, took a closer look at Harry, and frowned. "Don't think I don't know what you're doing, Albus. My answer has not changed, you know." Slughorn shouted after Dumbledore, but the headmaster didn't reply. "Professor Slughorn. Can I get a copy of this picture? You see, I don't have that many photos of my mother." "Of course. I'll be most happy to give you a copy, Harry." "Thank you." Harry smiled at the gentle old man. "You're in the Daily Prophet. They're now calling you the prophesied one rather than the chosen one. I'm sure they'll come up with more silly names after I destroy Mr. Noseless." "Mr. Noseless?" Slughorn asked with a chuckle. "It's the name I have for Tom Riddle. I think I'll keep using that instead of the name he chose for himself." "Do you think you can destroy him, Harry?" "Many have tried in the past, including Dumbledore," Slughorn asked with an unreadable expression. "I've battled the Dark Lord many times in the last 5 years. Not once had he triumphed over me. He couldn't win even when I was a baby. Within 2 years, I'll destroy him and anyone that supports him," Harry said firmly. "You're very brave, Harry. Your parents would be very proud," Slughorn said after a moment of silence. "Oh, before I forget." Harry took out the invitation card for the party and gave it to Slughorn. "I'm holding a party to celebrate the restoration of Potter Manor. I hope you'll come, Professor." "Ah, yes. The party. Dumbledore chose that moment to come out of the loo. "Well, Horace. You know why I'm here. Hogwarts would be most blessed by what you've to offer for our students. I extend you the same offer I've offered you for the last decade. The position is yours if you'll take it." "Well, Slughorn looked indecisive for a moment before caving in. "Fine. But I want a raise, and I want my old quarters." Dumbledore smiled. "That can be arranged, old friend." Branch Reality *. An excerpt from Hogwarts, A History by Bathilda Bagshot. The century of Hogwarts' rise as a formidable castle and center for learning was a time of great upheaval among wizards and muggles. The formation of the Kingdom of Scotland under House Targaryen catapulted magical education and muggle education. Some say the influence of Queen Rowena Ravenclaw shaped the education-oriented policies implemented by Scotland's first king in his admittedly short reign. King Hadrian reigned for barely 2.5 years, but throughout this reign, he created hundreds of learning centers in the lands under his control. The Roman churches that symbolized oppression and blind faith became centers for learning for both muggles and wizards. The King and Queen of Scotland directly funded the schools using the royal treasury to ensure they ruled a populace who valued knowledge above all else. It was Queen Rowena who enshrined the motto of all royal schools: "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure." As the borders of Scotland expanded, so did the number of schools. But Hogwarts remained the prime destination for magical children to complete their studies. At first, Hogwarts struggled to attract many students once it was created by the founders. However, King Hadrian's endorsement of the school and appeal to wizarding families saw a significant influx of young students to the school. The assurance of free meals and fee-less education must have also been attractive for many poor families. Even during the regency of Queen Rowena, the rapid pace of education never stopped. Centuries of repression on free speech, freedom of thought and expression were suddenly taken away inside the newly formed Kingdom of Scotland. As a result, many more wizarding schools, muggle schools and even mixed schools started to form inside the kingdom. This was also a time of most epic wars. In his short reign, King Hadrian had waged many great battles that saw the defeat of the Muggle kingdoms bordering Scotland. The schools also became the training grounds for the future army of Scotland, which incorporated the warring ways of the goblins into its curriculum. While Queen Rowena initially opposed teaching warcraft in schools, she eventually came around to the idea proposed by her husband. When King Hadrian disappeared or ascended, as believed by modern Muggles, the four founders of Hogwarts became involved in a fight amongst themselves. Salazar Slytherin wanted Hogwarts to adopt the teachings of war as he feared the absence of King Hadrian would threaten the kingdom's stability. Slytherin feared the Muggles would rebel and try to wrest control of the kingdom from House Targaryen in the king's absence. He wanted Hogwarts students to learn warfare so that wizards would never become subservient to Muggles again. When the differences between the founders widened, Salazar Slytherin turned his back on Hogwarts. Despite allowing her husband's policy of military training in schools, Queen Rowena was not willing to forcibly enforce this in Hogwarts. Even if Salazar Slytherin abandoned Hogwarts, he never abandoned the family of the man he admired most. He went to the capital and met with Queen Rowena, requesting that he be allowed to impart his knowledge to her children. At the time, Queen Rowena had only given birth to her second child, Princess Daenerys Targaryen. Some say Slytherin was attracted to the royal court because of the allure of power and influence. But most historians agree that Salazar Slytherin must have settled at the court to guide his kin. It was no secret that King Hadrian Targaryen was a Parselmouth like Slytherin. While it was uncertain whether the Slytherins gained the gift of Parseltongue from House Targaryen or vice versa, it was agreed upon by many that both families shared blood. Time would prove Salazar Slytherin's decision to join the court and focus his efforts on Prince Alexander's and Princess Daenerys' education to be a boon for the kingdom. The enemies of Scotland had rejoiced upon hearing the unexpected absence of Hadrian the Dragon. But they never realized the age of the dragon was only beginning. After all, the blood of the dragon remained strong on this earth, and they'd soon realize the true might of the House of the Dragon. Chapter 99, Party at Potter Manor Part 1. Gringotts Bank was the sole wizarding bank of magical Britain. It was also a neutral territory where the goblins of the Goblin Nation and wizards of the Wizarding Nation interacted freely. Goblins were natural hoarders of wealth, weapons, artifacts, and anything of substantial value. They also controlled the wizarding economy, at least in Britain. But the goblins also provided their vaults as holding lockers for objects of no particular value with no questions asked for a fee. Such vaults could hold projects of questionable origin and magic, facilitating wizards to circumvent ministry regulations. That was why Bellatrix and Voldemort had confidently tucked away Hufflepuff's cup in Gringotts. Unfortunately for the Dark Lord, getting past Gringotts' security was peanuts so long as Bellatrix cooperated with Harry. Harry eyed Bellatrix Lestrange, walking side by side with Sirius as they entered the bank. He erased decades of her memories after he extracted all the information he wanted from the witch. Right now, Bellatrix had no recollection of what happened in her life. She didn't even see herself as an adult, which made it easier for Harry to keep her on a tight leash. For all intents and purposes, Bellatrix was a child ignorant of most things in the wizarding world. But he wasn't confident the memory charm would hold for too long. A witch as powerful as Bellatrix could overcome the charm's hold on her mind given enough time. That was why Harry brought Bellatrix straight to Gringotts with Sirius as a backup after he was confident the memory charm had taken effect. Walk fast, Bella. Once we're finished here, I'll buy you 2 more chocolate ice cream, Harry said, urging the witch towards a teller. I want 3. Bella said with a pout. All right. You'll have 3. Harry said with exasperation, eyeing the older witch blindly enjoying a vanilla ice cream inside the bank, ignorant of her surroundings. Good day, Master Goblin. She needs to access her vault, Sirius said, facing the teller while Harry closely watched his surroundings. Does she have a name, Lord Black? The goblin grinned down at them, showing off a row of pointed teeth. She's my cousin Bellatrix. For her safety, she is under a glamour charm. I hope Gringotts will respect the privacy of one of its most valued clients," Sirius said. The goblin teller eyed them keenly for a moment. "Of course," the goblin teller said softly. "Key, please." "She doesn't have her key, but her blood should suffice, no?" Sirius asked. "Very well." The goblin teller sighed. Thankfully, Bellatrix cooperated and did not make a fuss when the goblin teller pricked her finger and drew a drop of blood. The goblin smeared the blood on a long sheet of parchment and stared intently into the parchment as if it held all the secrets of the universe. "Everything seems to be in order." The goblin teller looked up from the parchment. "Bogord will take you to your vault." A scrawny goblin came around the teller's desk with a constipated look on his face. "Follow me." Bogord growled before walking into the interior of the bank. Harry exchanged a look with Sirius, and they followed Bogord, taking Bellatrix along with them. The cart ride through the intricate tunnels was fun, as usual. After nearly 10 minutes of going through many tunnels deep into the earth, the cart stopped before a large stone cave. Bogord looked closely at Bellatrix and then at the two of them before huffing. Harry smirked at the goblin once its back was turned. He had scrapped together a rune bracelet to make Bellatrix immune to any screening of goblin magic that could undo the memory charm. Thanks to his extended stay in the branch reality, he had a deep understanding of goblin magic, which facilitated the creation of some cloaking magic that allowed him to withstand the usual scrutiny inside Gringotts. Goblins could temporarily break all wizarding spells within their bank, which would have interfered with the memory charm he placed on Bellatrix. But that was no longer possible, and he wasn't waiting around to see how long that shield would last. "Stay close to me," Bogord muttered as he pressed his hands against the wall. Harry felt a rush of magic pass through the cave ahead. Before his eyes, lamps lit up with yellow flames. Once they crossed the dark cave, they came across a huge hall where a gigantic pale dragon guarded 5 vaults on the other end. "Dear Merlin, that's a huge dragon." Sirius breathed out upon seeing the giant dragon wrapped in chains. "Come," Bogord said, picking up a pair of clankers from the side of the cave. "This is the most secured area in Gringotts. The dragon is a savage even if it's half blind." "How are we to get around the dragon?" Sirius asked with a slight shiver. "These clankers will help us, Lord Black," said Bogord. The dragon suddenly roared and looked in their direction with a snarl. It might be partially blind, but its ears function exceptionally. Harry muttered. The dragon reared his head to breathe fire at them, but Bogord used the clankers. The small instrument in the goblin's hand began to make loud ringing noises when he started shaking it in his hands. The dragon let out a painful howl as it moved to a corner as if in fear and pain. Harry, Sirius, and a fearful Bellatrix closely followed Bogord. Harry kept his lit wand ahead, but his eyes were pinned on the dragon. He felt pity for the majestic creature bound in servitude to the goblins. Perhaps his bond to the Red Queen made him more sympathetic to the pale dragon bound in chains. He could also see the long red scars on the dragon's body. It was as if someone had used a flame whip on the dragon. Once they reached the other end of the hall, Bogord pressed his palm against the dark wooden door of the vault. The door melted away, and Harry saw the large treasure inside when he directed his lit wand inside the vault. There was silver and gold aplenty inside. Suits of armor, shields and swords lined the walls, and so did skins of different animals, bones, and stuffed heads. He suspected the vault was not just the safe haven for Bellatrix's wealth and the Horcrux. It was most likely the war chest of Voldemort or perhaps a portion of loot from the last war. Harry conjured a long metal stick in his hand and stepped into the vault. He was careful not to touch anything inside the vault because of the Gemino and Flagranti curses. Harry placed a hovering charm on his boots, lifting him a few feet from the ground. He immediately directed the light from his wand into the top shelves of the vault as he carefully searched for the cup. He searched shelf after shelf for the cup until finally he found it. The intricate patterns on the cup matched the images he saw in Bellatrix's memory. Besides that, he could feel the cup starting to assume a dark aura now that it had been found. The Horcrux could already feel the danger Harry posed to its continued existence and was trying to assert itself with its dark nature. Your mind tricks are not going to work here, Harry thought with a snort. He plucked the cup by locking its handle with the stick in his hand. Carefully, he held out the cup towards Sirius, who let it fall into a wooden box. Once the box was sealed, runes flared to life, and the dark aura of the Horcrux suddenly disappeared. Harry cancelled the hovering charm and exchanged a look with Sirius. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Sirius asked with a wicked gleam in his eyes. I suspect that's the case. Let's take the swag out of the vault and put it to some good use, said Harry. Oh yeah. I've always thought Hogwarts could use some new brooms and a nice scholarship program for the children. Sirius mused aloud. Harry looked at Bellatrix once he found merit in Sirius' suggestion. Bella, what did you think? If you take all this into this little pouch, you can have as much ice cream as you want. Safe to say, Harry and Sirius managed to walk out of Gringotts with a sizable portion of wealth in Bellatrix's vault. The exciting part was all they had to do was buy a couple more ice creams for Bellatrix. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Sirius asked, watching from a corner of the cell. This is for the best, said Harry, finishing the transference process. Harry removed the runestone glowing with Egyptian hieroglyphs from the forearm of Bellatrix. It looks like you succeeded. She no longer bears the dark mark on her arm, Sirius said with a look of contemplation. She'll not need it any longer, Harry said succinctly. If she escapes Azkaban again, Voldemort will be cross with her. Once he sees the mark is absent, he'll tear apart her mind and find what we've done, Sirius warned. I agree. Harry nodded absently. You agree? Sirius blinked in surprise. Then why are you sending her to the Ministry? She'll only warn Voldemort of our plans in advance. Oh no, she won't, Harry said. Harry pressed the tip of his wand against Bellatrix's wrist and began murmuring a spell in Parseltongue while calling forth old magic to bind the spell into the core of Bellatrix's soul. The cell was bathed in the heavy presence of old magic until Harry stopped the spell. Glowing red runes began appearing on Bellatrix's wrist until they finally burned onto her skin in the form of 3 rings. There, that'll do to keep her quiet. What did you do? Sirius asked warily. Let's just say she'll be a nasty surprise and another painful lesson for our resident Dark Lord. But I doubt his thick skull will allow the message to sink in properly, said Harry, holstering his wand and walking away from the cell with Sirius following closely behind. What's the message? To never cross a Potter. That's a good message as any, I suppose. Sirius snorted with laughter. Harry and Sirius went further down the tunnels until they finally reached a chamber. You asked me why I'm not powering the wards before the party. You'll have your answer today, Harry said before closing his eyes and clearing his mind of all distractions. Harry placed his hands horizontally on the floor while standing on his feet, connecting his ring fingers with his thumbs. On his left hand, the runestone containing the dark mark started emitting a faint pulse of magic, while on his right hand, the wand started humming with the song of a phoenix. He could hear the gasp of surprise from Sirius as the magic deep in the earth responded to his will. When Harry opened his eyes, the room was filled with several concentric circles of runes. Harry stood at the dead center of the runic circles and unceremoniously dropped the runestone in his hand. The runestone struck the ground at his feet and was swallowed up promptly. What was that? Sirius asked awestruck. You wanted wards, did you not? Let's see Voldemort and his cronies try their best to breach my wards. Harry, Sirius said with trepidation. When you were gone last month, what exactly were you doing? Conquering and ruling as the King of Scotland. He answered truthfully. Oh. Sirius said faintly, suppressing the urge to pry. I was just mostly drinking fire whiskey and occasionally trying to blow up Dumbledore's head. Both are worthy endeavors, Harry said after a moment of consideration. Are you all right? I mean, are you happy being here? Sirius asked softly. Harry fell silent and observed his godfather, who had nothing but concern in his eyes. Why do you ask? Harry asked. Dumbledore and Croaker warned us that you might have started a life of your own in the other dimension. They were right, weren't they? Harry nodded. I'm so sorry, Harry. You might have been. There is no point in dwelling on the past. I'm teaching myself to stay in the present and look towards the future. That's good. Sirius patted him on his shoulder. I won't ask of what you lost. I have enough experience to know that there is nothing that could equal wasted time. But someday, when you're ready, I hope you regain something of greater value than you lost. Harry frowned thoughtfully into the distance before sighing. Come. There is much work to be done. We've pulled off a good enough party. Daphne said, looking around the crowded garden with a thoughtful frown. I think. There is decent food, fine wine, and an atmosphere that's making everyone around here jumpy. This is a good party as any, Daphs. Harry whispered, strolling through the garden arm in arm with Daphne by his side. I couldn't help but notice that you had a long chat with my father and mother today. What was that about? She suddenly asked, but Harry was hardly surprised. He wondered why she hadn't brought up that question so far. Damien and Evelyn hadn't bothered covering up their sense of victory. Do you really want to know? Harry asked. Daphne blinked at the undertone in Harry's voice, but she was curious. Yes, she said succinctly. Your parents wanted to know what my intentions towards you are. They're under the impression that you're smitten by the Potter charm, and they want to protect you. What did they do? Daphne asked with some wariness. They proposed a betrothal contract to be drawn up. Daphne was stunned into silence. What did you? Harry took a long look at her before pressing his lips near her ear. I agreed. I couldn't let go of the chance to make you mine. Daphne glared at him, making him chuckle. But I told them I'd agree to any contract only after you consent. Harry said with a minute twitch of his lips. Honestly, I don't like the idea of a contract between us. It's an old tradition, and I'm surprised you even entertained the thought. Daphne said with pursed lips. Well, it's not a marriage contract. This is merely a betrothal contract with no penalty for voiding the contract. Is that supposed to make me happy? Daphne asked in annoyance as they stopped near a sakura tree. Aren't you? Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. I don't know what I should feel. Daphne looked searchingly into his eyes. You're not the only one. I quite like our current dynamic, but I understand the concerns of Damien and Evelyn. Discarding their concerns seemed inappropriate, so I said I'll consent if you agree to it. I suppose I knew this day was coming at some point. So, there's that. Daphne said, trying to channel aloofness, but he could read her like a book with one look into her eyes. Oh, it can't be all that bad. I'm charming, funny, wealthy, powerful, and whimsical. What more do you need? Harry asked with a full pout. Modesty and an absence of reckless behavior for a start. Daphne said blandly. Where is the fun in that? Harry shrugged. I suppose I could be persuaded to marry a rapscallion like you provided the right incentives, she said snobbishly, turning her nose up. What might these incentives entail? I only ask because there is a shortage of blonde-haired, blue-eyed witches who'd never think of marrying the last Potter, Harry said sardonically. I'll allow you a detailed list. Daphne smirked. You two are worse than Mum and Dad. Get a room, you two. Astoria came out of nowhere to deliver a sledgehammer that broke their conversation. Why are you here? Go bother someone else. Daphne huffed. Everyone in the ballroom is asking for the host inside to start the dance. Hogging the prophesied one all for yourself at this crucial juncture would be discourteous. Astoria said with a straight face. We just came here from the ballroom. They were talking our ears off. Daphne rolled her eyes. Maybe you should go find someone else to bother and let me escort Harry back to his wonderful guests. After all, he was the one to decide on an open invite was a fantastic idea. He should get to meet and greet the wonderful fellows of our little squalor, said Astoria with a wicked glint in her eyes. What a fantastic idea! He's all yours. Daphne skipped away happily from his arm, leaving him with Astoria. Harry watched his girlfriend go with a tinkling laugh in her wake, her green dress glittering under the light. Let's go. My father has gathered several foreign dignitaries and eminent personalities to meet you. I'm sure you'll enjoy every moment of it. Astoria said with a wicked smirk. How cruel of you, Astoria. Cruel is my middle name, she said with a chuckle while leading him to the ballroom without remorse. As Astoria led him towards her father, he had to meet and greet a whole lot of people along the way. Lady Longbottom and Marchbanks were the first he met on his second arrival. Neville's grandmother was distant but polite as well. She was distracted the whole time they conversed and looked ready for a fight. On the other hand, Madame Marchbanks was talking entirely about his OWL results. He derived some sick pleasure in watching the woman tear into Astoria, warning her not to waste her time on parties and glittery things and to focus on studies like him. She was all praises for Harry, and being the vain little rascal he was, he ate it all up the entire time. He supposed scoring straight O's in every subject except history of magic would impress the governor of the Wizarding Examinations Authority. Astoria was understandably all too eager to escort him away from the good woman who only spoke so highly of him. They met some Hogwarts students and their families along the way. Finally, they arrived at a round table where Damien and Evelyn Greengrass were sitting with some of their acquaintances. Father, I've brought our gracious host as requested, Astoria said, executing a perfect curtsy. Thank you, dear, a familiar voice said from their back. Harry didn't need to turn around to know that it was his grandmother. We've been most eager to speak with our host. There are many important matters that we ought to discuss. Isn't that so, dear Harry? Harry had been expecting a visit from his grandmother. He was surprised it had taken this long. He expected her to visit him immediately after returning from the branch reality. After all, she wanted access to Slytherin's chamber before the school opened. Yes. We have a lot of things to discuss, Harry said with a nod. Good. Perenelle smiled. Now take a seat, young man. An excerpt from The Grand Alliance, Goblin Wizard Pact that Transformed the Century by Madame Celine Smith. While some see King Hadrian as a sorcerer of great battle powers and magical skill, he was also renowned for his diplomacy. His single-handed effort bound the goblins to pledge their fealty to House Targaryen in perpetuity. He had proven his strength to the Goblin Kings when he decimated their army that tried to attack Hogwarts. It's mentioned in the journals of Queen Rowena I that the Goblin Kingdoms were wary of Hogwarts and what it meant for the future. The consolidation of wizards and witches in any form was recognized as a threat by all the Goblin Kings of the time. They feared the unity among wizards rather than the rapid expansion of Muggle kingdoms and empires. Though great in number, the Goblin kingdoms did not consider Muggle kingdoms a threat. This belief would later be the undoing of goblins across the rest of continental Europe. But in Scotland, before the consolidation of wizards happened, goblins suffered defeat at the hands of the four founders of Hogwarts. The Goblin King Sabretooth broke an uneasy peace between the Goblin kingdoms and the founders. It was the internal politics within the nearby Goblin Kingdom that led King Sabretooth to put Hogwarts under siege. But his luck ran short as the siege attracted a traveler from the faraway land of Valyria to Hogwarts. The story of the battle is carved in great detail on the front doors of Hogwarts. To this day, it serves as a warning for those who dare to challenge Hogwarts and the authority of House Targaryen. However, the decisive victory over the Goblin army led the way to an alliance when King Hadrian began his conquest. The Targaryen king swayed the Goblin king Snipshank to forge an alliance in return for expanding the land holdings of the Goblin kingdom. During the 3-year reign of King Hadrian, the land holdings of Scotland increased fivefold. This, coupled with the assimilation of other Goblin kingdoms into the new Scottish kingdom, slowly but surely integrated the goblins into the common army and then accepted the authority of the Crown of Scotland. It is told, however, that House Targaryen's unique gift of bonding with the dragons was one of the main factors that led to their acquiescence before the Scottish crown. Not only was the goblin army now sworn to a Targaryen king on the throne, but they were also the royal smiths of the kingdom. Each Targaryen king from Hadrian I commissioned their blades upon their ascension to the throne. The old sword of the monarch was returned to the goblins as per goblin traditions. All such swords of past Targaryen monarchs were later moved to a goblin-run museum at the request of Queen Asteria II during her reign in 1775, adjacent to the Goblin Bank of Gringotts. To this day, Goblins of Scotland holds a special status among the goblins of the world. The entire economy of the Eurozone was run by Scottish goblins after Titus Targaryen's Continental War in 1670. While many goblin kingdoms outside Scotland view Scottish goblins as the lesser for swearing oaths to a wizard, the Scottish goblins considered it the single most brilliant decision in their recorded history. As an old saying among the Scottish goblins goes, "We traded a crown of steel for an entire continent." Chapter 100, Party at Potter Manor Part 2. Benedict Ferguson glared at the horde of blood traders and mudbloods partying away at Potter Manor. In his eyes, these people didn't deserve to be happy or enjoy a party. These people should have surrendered to the Dark Lord and allowed his lord to cleanse the undesirables so that good wizarding folk could live free of Muggle influence. For centuries, his people had hidden under a rock and allowed the Muggle filth to take control of the world. But the Dark Lord would soon change all that. The Dark Lord would soon destroy the magic-stealing Muggles, and then wizards would rule over the world. But first, the enemies of the Dark Lord in the wizarding world had to be purged. So many Muggleborns had already stolen magic from the good pureblood families. Such thieves and their blood trader friends had to be put down for good before the Dark Lord could purge the Muggles. It was for this reason Benedict was here in Potter Manor. When his lord had tasked him with infiltrating the party in Potter Manor, he was understandably worried for his safety. He had no choice but to obey his orders and attend the party. However, his fears were for nothing, as he was not even searched while entering the manor of his lord's most hated enemy. Once inside, he signaled the rest of his lord's servants through the dark mark. He watched his fellow Death Eaters enter the Potter Manor one by one. As minutes passed by, he felt his confidence climb. He was giddy that he was about to become a part of a major attack on the Potter Manor. Suddenly, he found a house elf with a tray full of drinks before him. "Fire Whiskey Master," the elf offered the tray with many beautifully designed glasses filled halfway with his favorite drink. Benedict happily took 2 drinks from the tray and drained 1 glass in one go. But as soon as the liquid drained down his throat, he felt drowsy. It was as if his limbs were weighed down by 1,000 pounds of iron. "Does Master wish to rest?" the house elf asked in a squeaky voice. "Aye, Wayan." Benedict felt the words slur in his mouth. The next thing he knew, he felt like he was being squeezed through a tube, and his vision distorted. He felt a stillness set in for a time before he slowly started to regain his bearings. Benedict immediately sat up and found himself sitting on the floor in a dark room. "What in the name of Merlin is this? Where am I?" Benedict muttered as he looked around in the dark room with growing fear. "Don't worry. Everything will be over soon." A silky, smooth voice suddenly spoke, startling Benedict. The darkness in the room suddenly disappeared, and Benedict was left facing a blonde-haired girl standing outside a cell. It was then he realized he was behind bars. He immediately searched his pocket and robes for his wand but found it empty. "Looking for this." Benedict's breath caught in his throat when he saw his wand in the blonde girl's hand. "Don't worry. You'll have the rest of your friends to keep you company." The girl gave him a derisive look before turning away to walk away. "No, wait. You're Damian Greengrass' daughter, aren't you? Help me out of this prison, and you'll be richly rewarded by the Dark Lord," Benedict said desperately. He saw the girl freeze and look at him with cold blue eyes. "Really? What sort of rewards?" the girl asked with a raised eyebrow. "Power beyond measure. The Dark Lord will make you strong. He'll welcome you, a pureblood witch of noble lineage, into his ranks." "I see. You must have been granted this great power by the Dark Lord if you're speaking so confidently." "Yes. Yes, of course. The Dark Lord grants power to those of pure blood ancestry and loyalty." Benedict lied easily. I see. Then, you'll be capable of breaking out of this cell all by yourself. You only need to muster this great power bestowed by the Dark Lord. Benedict scowled at the girl, realizing she had no intention of releasing him from the cell. The Dark Lord will bring death and destruction upon this place. You and your family will die a most painful death. Benedict screamed as he slammed into the cell with rage in his eyes. Oh, there'll be a lot of death this night. The girl looked down at him as if he were a fly, making Benedict's blood boil. Blood traitor! How could you consort with dirty mudbloods in half? Benedict started to go off on his tirade, but he found his voice leaving him. There, that's better. You'll get the company of your friends shortly. Benedict watched with baleful eyes as the greengrass girl walked away while he desperately tried to break the iron bars holding him prisoner. Suddenly, his fellow Death Eaters started to appear in his cell one by one, just as the greengrass girl promised. With a sigh, he leaned against the wall of the cell and waited for his lord to rescue him and the others. Harry observed the people sitting beside his grandmother at the table. Damian Greengrass was the only man he could tentatively trust because of certain aligned interests. There was Louis Bourbon at the table, the hit wizard his grandmother assigned him for destroying the giants loyal to the Dark Lord. The other two men at the table were a mystery to Harry. He felt a localized secrecy ward going up surrounding the table. I have to say this party of yours is not half bad. Though, this home could use a better look. Paranel commented after making a show of looking around. Oh. Do you have any suggestions for my home? Harry asked for the sake of conversation. Oh, yes. Don't build one in these damp islands. Paranel said with a chuckle, followed by the other men sitting at the table. Some of us must content ourselves with what we have, Lady Lilith. Not all of us can enjoy the sunny beaches of France indefinitely, said Harry. Let me introduce you to Christoph Schmidt and Ivan Volkov. These men will help you with your troublesome Dark Lord. Harry frowned at the two men who waved at him lazily. With a cursory look, he could sense their magic was strong. But having a strong aura was not a guarantee for anything. What brought this sudden dose of generosity? Harry asked, keeping his doubt about the competence of these two men. I'm merely fulfilling my end of the bargain, and it is now time for you to reciprocate. Now, give me what I want, Harry. Paranel looked pointedly at him. Harry stared into the green eyes that were perfect copies of his own before sighing. All right. Harry said with a short nod. He took an envelope from his pocket and slid it towards his grandmother. Inside, you'll find instructions to access Slytherin's chamber from the Forbidden Forest. There is also a portkey to take you to the site. You'll find a closed lid made of stone on the floor, leading you to the chamber through a long pipeline. Paranel stared long and hard at her grandson before taking the envelope. You've been scouring the chamber for years. What interesting things have you found, Harry? She asked curiously. Oh, I don't think it'd be appropriate to deny you the gratification of a treasure hunt, Lady Lilith. Harry evaded giving any information. If you'll excuse me, I've got some guests to attend to. With that parting shot, he escaped from the table and took rounds amongst his guests. The music band Gaelic Hummers were starting another jaunty tune when Harry found Daphne at the entrance of the ballroom. He immediately went to her side after exchanging some polite greetings with the guests along the way. Harry offered his hand and led Daphne to the dance floor. They're here. The elves have started to take them into the cells. Daphne whispered as they made slow steps, following the music in the ballroom. Momo wizards always underestimate the power of those they consider their lesser. I've found the house elves to be wonderful beings with magic surpassing most wizards. Harry said with a grin. What are you planning to do with these prisoners? Daphne asked curiously. I'll have some delivered to the ministry in exchange for favors. Harry mused audibly for her ears. Daphne shot him an approving look. That's smart. What about the rest? She asked, raising a delicate eyebrow as they glided through the floor in tune with the music. That's a secret. He was subjected to the infamous Daphne stare that was in parts cute and compelling. But I might be tempted to share more details if you agree to the contract. Harry winked. Daphne audibly huffed in exasperation. Out of the many things that I expected to happen in the future, I never expected Harry Potter, the boy who lived, to ask for a marriage contract to my face. Daphne said while shaking her head. You could consider it being a privilege. Harry smirked while adjusting his hold on Daphne's waist to get a better reach. Don't be cheeky. Daphne pinched his shoulder. Harry retaliated in kind by pinching along her navel, making Daphne let out an eep. Stop that. People are watching. Daphne warned him. You think they're watching us when they're most likely focusing on their dance partners. Somebody has an overinflated sense of self-importance. Harry said with a chuckle. Oh, in that case, why don't we just dance naked in this ballroom? Daphne snarked, rolling her eyes at him. Interesting thoughts you got there, Daphne. I find it interesting that you immediately thought of getting naked. Harry said suggestively. There is a lot of subliminal messaging with you, isn't there? Why you? Daphne looked incensed, her eyes flaring up with an affronted look. A tremor passed through the whole manor before she could tear into him for teasing her so much. What was that? Daphne asked with worry as she looked around. Harry frowned as the music slowly came to a standstill. It's the wards. Someone tried to bring down the wards protecting us. Is it holding together? Daphne asked, looking concerned. Don't worry. Voldemort will find that my wards are not so easy to breach. Harry said with a wicked smile. Harry and Daphne moved outside the ballroom and into the garden, where they could observe the wards outside. They could see flashes of light and slight tremors passing through the area as someone assaulted the wards from outside. Despite the continuous assault on the wards, the protective dome hardly changed, except it became visible to everyone. While Harry wasn't troubled by the assault on his wards, that was not the case for the wizards and witches in the manor. He tapped his wand against his throat, applying the magnifying charm. Sonorous. There is no need to worry. The wards surrounding the manor cannot be breached. As for those assaulting the wards, he let actions speak rather than some lengthy explanation. The ground beneath them shook as the sculptures and fountains in the garden started to shift, and in their place, large ballistas came up. He could hear the people whisper amongst themselves as the ballistas aimed their bolts at the areas where the protective dome was being attacked. Once they aimed, the bolts on the ballistas glowed with runes before being shot towards their target. While the witches and wizards were stupefied at the freely moving ballistas, Harry knew they were being controlled by the house elves from the cellars beneath the garden grounds. There were charmed periscopes fitted to the ballistas that allowed the elves to zoom in on their targets. Bright flashes of fire and explosion could be seen in the distance. The advantage of seclusion from Muggle settlements allowed Harry to use some flashier attacks against his enemies. The elves didn't let up on the offensive and maintained consistent assault on enemy positions. After a steady stream of assault, the ballistas stopped and folded back into the ground, only to be replaced by sculptures and fountains. Harry initially wanted to use machine guns, but his trip to the past left him with some serious advantages over magical warfare. The secrets of goblin warfare were quite interesting and adaptable for wizards to master. And he had mastered the art out of necessity. There was also caution about staying his hand and using Muggle weapons against wizards in a public setting. He didn't want to get suspicion on his head for the murder of reformed Death Eaters towards the end of the third task. I think they're dealt with. Daphne said in awe. Of course they are. Was there any doubt? Harry looked at her in bemusement. Believing it and seeing it with my own eyes are different. Daphne muttered. That has to be the wicked thing I've ever seen. Tonks came from nowhere, right behind Harry. I've been wondering where you were all this time. Harry looked critically at Tonks. I've been around. She answered evasively. You mean you were disguised? Someone had to keep an eye out for you. Tonks winked, changing her face and hair to that of another woman before retaining her original look. Anyway, the Aurors are moving into the position where you attacked. If we're lucky, we'll capture a few Death Eaters. See ya. Harry stared after taunts as she walked out of the garden, giving him a backhanded wave. She is so rude. Harry muttered. I like her. Daphne grinned. Of course you would. Harry sighed. What is that supposed to mean? A pair of blue eyes glared into his own, and just like that Harry was in trouble again. There was a brief recess to the party because of the attack, but it came back to full swing once the Aurors returned with good news that the attack had been successfully repelled. Unfortunately, the Aurors couldn't take any prisoners from the Death Eaters. By the time a squad of Aurors approached the site of the enemy, they were already gone. There were a few bodies on the field, but the Aurors had already identified most of them as werewolves of Fenrir Greyback's pack. Seeing the dark face of Amelia Bones and the way she was tearing into the Aurors for their inability to capture even a single Death Eater, Harry offered the Ministry a way to save face. Harry releases 2 of the Death Eaters he captured into the Ministry custody. He also sent Bellatrix along with them, and Minister Bones was happy to a few Death Eaters to parade before the press. The last he saw of Amelia Bones, she was happily chatting away with a few of his guests while her Aurors took the prisoners discreetly into the Ministry holding cells. He suspected a press conference was being prepared in the Ministry while the minister interacted with his guests. Harry also noticed his grandmother was nowhere to be seen. He suspected the woman felt it was better to leave rather than threaten her exposure with Dumbledore present at the party. The Order members were now prowling his manor openly. Even Professor Slughorn had arrived for the party, but the man stayed close to Dumbledore's shadow, probably fearing another attack. Harry slinked back into the cellar to meet with Dobby, seeing that the party was going smoothly without any issue. Master Harry. Good work, Dobby. Now, deliver one of these Death Eaters to Aragog. Yes, Mater Harry. As the excitable elf teleported away with a Death Eater in the cell to the Forbidden Forest, Harry went straight to another part of the cellar. The deal with Aragog was still on for Acromantula silk. He had his doubts about how long it'd last with Aragog's health in decline. The Acromantula silk was making him a lot of gold, so he hoped he could keep the deal with Aragog's children. Otherwise, he'd have to kill them all. He found Winky and a few other elves setting up Nagini's cage. With his grandmother having access to the chamber, he felt it was better for Nagini to stay at Potter Manor. Besides, he was almost ready to try his hand at extracting the Horcrux from Voldemort's pet snake. He supposed he could close that chapter before Hogwarts reopened. And then, he could try to extract the soul shard trapped in his head if the process he devised was a success. Branch Reality *****. An excerpt from The Age of the Dragon by Diana Black. The Age of the Dragon is commonly acknowledged as the 10th century. However, the exact date would be 930 CE to 1000 CE. This period of time was eventful in world history, but none so more than in the Scottish Isles. The rise of House Targaryen changed the course of history in the Scottish Isles and the world. It was the first time in recorded history that a wizard bonded with a dragon. All contemporary sources from that era, close to the first Scottish king, highlighted this fact in their writings. However, the most interesting phenomenon was the continued bond the descendants of Hadrian Targaryen enjoyed with dragons. Hadrian Targaryen's familiar, the Red Queen, later bonded with his son, Prince Alexander Targaryen. The dragons that hatched from the eggs of the Red Queen bonded with Princess Daenerys Targaryen and other Targaryen descendants. This was another event that was unheard of in the wizarding history. The bond that those with Targaryen ancestry enjoyed with dragons allowed them to exert power over the Scottish Islands. Within 3 years, King Hadrian had assimilated 3 kingdoms to make the Scottish Kingdom. Prince Alexander and Princess Daenerys would expand the kingdom's boundary even further as Queen Rowena reigned by conquering all the kingdoms in the Isles. Before the Queen abdicated her throne and crowned her son king, all the islands came under the Scottish crown. With the aid of the dragons bonded to Prince Alexander and Princess Daenerys, the Viking menace was destroyed on the islands, and all Viking ships later feared to sail into the Scottish Channel in fear of the Dragon Kings of Scotland. But Vikings were not the only foe decimated during the Age of the Dragon. The power wielded by House Targaryen was such that they started to systematically cull the Roman influence in their newly conquered lands. The non-magical populace was barred from practicing their faith in the Roman Church. The churches and other religious structures were forcibly taken over by the royal house. While considerable efforts were made to remove religion from all walks of life, the vacuum left by the absence of religion gave birth to a new one amongst the non-magical populace of the kingdom. The Valyrian faith took birth among the non-magical citizens of Scotland during the Age of the Dragon. Queen Rowena made concerted efforts to cull the spread of the religion, but during her last years on the throne, she changed her opinion. The court records from that time indicate that Salazar Slytherin was the man who convinced the queen to stop suppressing the new religion. These records were later cited to claim Salazar Slytherin was the one who started the religion. But this was never conclusively proven. The Valyrian faith proclaimed King Hadrian to be a demigod sent to the Scottish Isles by the heavens to establish God's kingdom in the mortal realm. It was believed that God recalled King Hadrian to the kingdom of heaven, only to return when the armies of hell rose to wage war against heaven. According to the faith, the war was prophesied to happen in 14 locations across the planet, and this future war is called the War of the 14 Flames. It is believed 14 Targaryen princes would wage this war against the armies of hell and save the world from destruction. It became abundantly clear among the wizards of the time that someone used the details left by King Hadrian about his home island to create a new religion. However, the Valyrian faith only became stronger and spread wide after many wizards failed to find the mythical island of the first Targaryen king. The Age of the Dragon would strengthen the Valyrian faith in the Kingdom of Scotland. When House Targaryen started to expand into mainland Europe, the Valyrian faith came into conflict with the Christian faith and Islam. This later led to the War of Faiths for the next 5 centuries until the Continental War, waged by Titus Targaryen in the 17th century, cemented the Valyrian faith's dominance in the Eurozone. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated as Harry Potter. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.